A routine run on a quiet weekday morning would lead to a gruesome discovery and thrust investigators into one of Australia's most bizarre murders.
We'd never found him at all except for a boot and a pair of sunglasses.
It became evident that robbery wasn't the motive. You ask yourself, well, what then is the motive? And the only thing that was going to identify that person for us was his DNA.
It appeared to be someone who knew what they were doing, possibly even someone with medical skill.
And then of all things, he went to his mother's birthday party.
And it was at that time that we thought that we had a psychopathic killer on our hands.
When cab driver Eddie Barmad hadn't returned home following his night shift, his wife was immediately anxious. Eddie was a devoted husband, and he never deviated from routine. Her fears were well-founded.
The cabbie's final hours remain a mystery. He was last heard from at about 10 o'clock last night, taking a fare to Peakhurst, but was murdered in this secluded street on Sydney's northern beaches.
The scene was pretty much like any crime scene that you would go to, except the intensity of the attack on the victim was somewhat different to what you would see in other crime scenes, and the injuries that he had sustained were quite substantial and horrific.
Mr. Barmad emigrated from Lebanon in 1974. He leaves a wife and 7 children.
I was waiting this morning till my dad comes home. Yesterday I got 2 awards coming first in maths and first in electronics. He wanted to see this. But now he's gone.
The victim in this particular case had sustained numerous wounds to the arms and the hands area, which is indicative of him trying to defend himself.
As police searched the surrounding area for the murder weapon, the first piece of hard evidence was found. The ignition key to the taxi was located in the gutter some 60 metres away from the murder scene.
The key tag for those keys had a person's fingerprint imprinted in the victim's blood.
The key tag was not the only potential lead.
We had blood smearing within the front passenger area of the cab and also in the rear of the cab behind the driver's seat. Those signs indicated to us that there were more than likely 2 people in the cab when this took place.
Swabs of those smears were taken for testing. Detectives hoped that during Mr. Barmad's desperate struggle, the killer or killers might have been injured. Traces of their blood might still remain in the cab.
He never harm anybody, you know, all what he does believe, growing veggies. All what he doesn't have enemies, all people loves him.
On this particular occasion, the victim had a large wad of money in his top shirt pocket, and it became evident that robbery wasn't the motive. With the ferocity of the attack, you ask yourself, well, what then is the motive? It says to us as investigators, I really hate this person. You know, it's an anger type attack. And there's another component that comes into that, and on this occasion it was a full moon. And I know even myself years ago I would poo-poo the theory, but you see so much evidence of it that people do act strangely at these times. And so not wanting to be single-minded about it, that was one of the considerations, that we had a deranged person running around out there. And the other aspect of that, which was quite intriguing, was the signs in the cab said we had 2 people. Do you then have 2 deranged people running around? And that was a major interest to us.
A month later, another grisly murder. This time a torso had been discovered, washed up on the shores of a secluded bay.
The torso was found just a metre from the shore. It was first noticed on Tuesday.
It was all wrapped up in bubble wrap and string bag, and I didn't take much notice of it really. Just thought it looked odd.
I went over and photographed the torso in situ. I turned the body over and saw that there was a further package containing rocks which had been wired together on the back of the torso.
Looking at the torso, it appeared quite clear that it was the torso of a male in the prime of his life. He was solid, he was very, very tall. Thinking about that and thinking about people missing in the area that fitted that description, my mind went back to Stephen Dempsey, who disappeared some 3.5 months earlier, but very, very much fitted that physical description.
Say hi to Steve. Hi, Steve. Hi, Steve.
Stephen Dempsey was a 34-year-old landscape gardener who hadn't been seen since leaving work on August the 2nd, 1994.
Mr. Dempsey, look at this sexy body.
His abandoned car was found at a well-known homosexual beat 3 days later by his business partner, Peter Rolfe.
On my way home, I was going down the Wakehurst Parkway, and as I just drove past the entrance to Deep Creek, I suddenly remembered that Stephen told me that he used to frequent the place there. So I drove in, and there was his car parked there. I raced out of my car, looked in his car, and I saw the book he'd been reading the last time I saw him, lying page down on the passenger seat, and also his camera was lying there, and that suggested to me that perhaps he was still around the place.
There was also a food container lying on the floor of the car. The label read, August 2nd, the last time friends or family had seen Stephen alive.
The adrenaline was pumping, of course, when I found his car, but at the same time there was this terrible fear as to what on earth had happened, because it was so totally unlike him. OK, perhaps there was some reason he wouldn't contact me, but the fact that he wouldn't contact his sister, who he lived with, to explain his disappearance for 3 days. I yelled out his name a few times, and I was panicking, in a state of shock. And that's when I thought, right, I've got to notify the police straight away.
Police fear for the safety of a man missing from Sydney's northern beaches since Tuesday.
Mr Dempsey was last seen here in Neutral Bay working as a landscaper, but late yesterday his car was found at Deep Creek Reserve near Narrabeen.
It was locked up and intact. There was no visible signs of any foul play there. We would be seeking the assistance of people who frequent the reserve at Narrabeen. A lot of people would have been there and seen this motor vehicle over the last couple of days.
Someone had. Deep Creek Reserve was also a dog training area. For 3 mornings in a row, one dog owner noticed Stephen Dempsey's car parked in the same spot. On one of those mornings, his dogs pulled a boot from the creek.
We'd never found him at all except for a boot and a pair of sunglasses.
Both items were identified by the family as belonging to Stephen Dempsey. What detectives were yet to know was that this murder, now seemingly unrelated, would be linked to that of the taxi driver. When a torso was found washed up on a shore, one of the first things was to establish its identity. Without that, there was little chance that detectives could figure out a motive or find the killer. The remains were taken to the morgue in hope that the forensic pathologist could find some answers.
We often x-ray the decomposed body to see if we can find any signs of any projectiles, any sort of unusual findings, any fractures and so forth. So in this case, the body was x-rayed before we did anything else. And then when we x-rayed it, we saw an object in the middle of the chest, which looked like to me was a large scalpel blade. When we opened the chest and saw the blood and saw the arrow, we all said, oh my goodness.
Detective Lynch already suspected that the torso was that of Stephen Dempsey, and the discovery of the arrowhead in the heart narrowed the odds. 4 months earlier, the detective had sent divers into this creek, and what they found was now potentially a vital piece of evidence.
A bow and arrow had been found in the vicinity at the bottom of Deep Creek a short time after Mr Dempsey disappeared. Now that bow had been very corroded when we first discovered it, which led everyone to believe it had been there for in fact a lot longer than it had. Attached to that was a quiver with about 3 arrows with broadheads, and the broadhead was identical to the one that was in the chest of the deceased. I was fairly sure then my hunch had something to it.
I sort of said, well, that's fine, but this man's is too well preserved to have been dead for as long as this person had been. He didn't appear to me to be dead for 4 months.
Chris Lawrence was saying the body had been in the water for 3 weeks, so he had 3 months and a week to account for where had Stephen Dempsey been during that time. That was the mystery.
Well, I said, if it is him, then he's been somewhere else. They've put him somewhere in cold storage or done something with the body in the meantime.
There seemed little doubt that the torso was that of Stephen Dempsey, but it needed to be confirmed.
And in this particular case, all we had was a torso, and the only thing that was going to identify that person for us was his DNA.
But in order to do that, you have to have both the mother and the father. In this case, we did. There was blood still in the chest cavity, and so we did have usable nuclear DNA from the torso, and we were able to get a pretty quick result.
DNA tests have solved a murder mystery which has baffled Sydney police for months. They've confirmed that a human torso found at Pittwater last month was the remains of a man missing since August.
For the family of Stephen Dempsey, it's a tragic end to a 4-month search.
We know that Mr Dempsey died as a result of a penetrating injury to the chest area.
But that's virtually all police know, and they're again appealing to the public for help.
While the identity of the torso made headlines, the cause of death remained a secret.
With any investigation, you are very, very mindful about the evidence that you've got, firstly, and the information that you do and do not release. On this particular occasion, it occurred to us that the offender had overlooked the fact that he had left the arrowhead embedded in the victim's heart. And that arrowhead was the sole piece of evidence at that time that we had which connected the deceased to the killer.
But that arrowhead wasn't the only thing the killer had left behind. The forensic pathologist had also found possible clues to the killer's identity.
I've seen a number of bodies that had been dismembered, and this one had been done incredibly neatly. It appeared to be someone who knew what they were doing. Someone like a boner, somebody who worked in an abattoir, possibly even someone with medical skill.
And when Detective Lynch took the bow from Deep Creek to an archery specialist, he got more leads on the killer.
It had been built specifically to be very, very powerful, that bow. It had been put together to be powerful. And that was determined ultimately by what they call the draw weight, the amount of strength it takes to draw the string back. Well, this suggested that the person had it was fairly solid, he was fairly strong. Second of all, you could make a measurement between the bow handle and where the string's position was when it was fully strung. And that would give you the length between a person's wrist and their shoulder. And looking at that, it was worked out that the person that had a bow like that would have been about 5 foot 9 inches tall, 5 foot 10 inches tall.
Then another piece was added to the puzzle. A young man reported an incident at Deep Creek in December '93, some 8 months before Stephen Dempsey disappeared.
It was dusk. He and his friend had been walking along the path one way and they saw someone walking the opposite way. As they walked past him, they saw he was carrying a compound bow. They've heard a noise, they've turned around to see this person with the compound bow cocked and pointing at them. One of them scattered into the bush and ran away. The other one went into the bush, picked up a big stick and confronted this guy. Now luckily, that person had been a member of the Field Archery Club nearby and he had a very, very good knowledge of bows and arrowheads, etc., etc. He identified the bow as being a camouflaged compound bow, which was identical to the bow that we'd recovered in the water. He then described the arrowhead that he'd seen on that bow and which had been pointing at him, and he'd seen it fairly clearly as being a Davies Aztec arrowhead. He then went on to give a fairly accurate description of the person that had propped him with the bow. He was a male, he was 5 foot 9. He was a fairly solid build. He was white Australian. He was wearing a motorcycle jacket, which was interesting. And he was 8 months prior to the murder, seen with the bow, with identical arrowheads, some 100 yards away from the murder scene.
So was this person the killer of Stephen Dempsey? And what, if any, was his connection with the brutal murder of taxi driver Eddie Barmad? Nearly 4 months after the investigation began into Stephen Dempsey's murder, the police hit a brick wall.
With the detailed profile that we had, we knew a lot about the man. We didn't have his name. By releasing the cause of death with the arrowhead as being the cause, we were straight away narrowing down the field of people we would be possibly looking for.
Police are hunting a Sydney Rambo who murdered a young gardener with an arrow through the heart.
32-year-old Mr Dempsey was targeted at Deep Creek Reserve, Narrabeen, a notorious gay pickup beat. Police now fear the killer could be living out a sick fantasy, stalking bushwalkers on Sydney's northern beaches. 2 others had previously been menaced the year before Mr Dempsey's murder.
We're appealing to the public if they could come forward with any information, especially if they frequent the area down there, any information they have of seeing a man carrying a bow and arrow with quiver in the vicinity of the park from November 1993 through to about August 1994.
We released information and almost straight away we started getting calls from members of the public.
Good morning, Manuel. Please, can I help you?
I'm a member of a bushwalking group and I do recall being in Deep Creek Reserve about 18 months ago. We saw a young guy and he had a bow and an arrow, and I remember he said, "Watch out, there are a couple of poofters down the track."
He was hunting for fish with a bow and arrow. It was one of those fancy-looking bows with the pulleys on either end.
Is there any more information you can give us about this gentleman?
I'd say he'd be in his early 20s. He's about, say, 5'9", 5'10".
I was in the Deep Creek area on the northern beaches paddling a kayak, and something very strange up there happened. There was a guy up there, and I thought at the time that he was just fishing with a bow and arrow.
Was there any warning prior to that?
No, he didn't say anything. He continued to follow me. He was going through the bush at quite a rate of knots, so I was paddling as hard as I could, but he seemed intent on keeping up with me.
So there was certainly a person around that had a fetish with bows and arrows and assaulting people with them, or certainly scaring them.
He threatened 2 young guys. When was this?
Out of the hundreds of calls police received, 5 mentioned one person, 22-year-old Richard Leonard.
Who lived nearby. He was the same build, he was the same age group. He had a camouflaged compound bow in his house, or certainly had one at this time. He rode a motorcycle, he'd worked in an abattoir, and from every person we'd spoken to, he displayed the idiosyncrasies that we thought we were looking for with our man. We were cooking with gas, so to speak.
It now seemed as though the police had found their killer. But when they entered Richard Leonard's name into their computer to check on any previous form or convictions, their investigation took a whole new turn.
He presented at St Vincent's Hospital at 2 o'clock in the morning with his girlfriend, suffering from a knife wound to the chest. It had actually punctured his lung, deflated his lung.
He needed to have a drain put into his chest, into his lungs, and it's a very painful process apparently. And he refused painkillers and wanted to revel in the experience, so we were told. And again, you know, I mean, this all adds to the picture of the person we're looking at as being somewhat different to your normal and quite strange.
He said initially to the police that spoke to him at the hospital that he'd been attacked by a group of people in Hyde Park. Then he changed his story and in fact said that the injury was a result of an S&M session he'd had with his girlfriend. She too had some injuries to her hands at the time. But the police obviously hadn't believed him. They were a little bit perplexed about it. They couldn't take it any further with what they had. So they'd just put the report on that they'd spoken to this person at the St Vincent's Hospital.
The date Richard Leonard was admitted to St Vincent's was the 18th of November 1994, the same day as Eddie Barmad, the taxi driver, was found dead in his cab.
When our crime scene team examined Mr Barmad's taxi at Colorado Plateau, an unusual looking smear was seen in the centre of the steering wheel. It actually was a different colour to surrounding blood smears, and that's why it caught the eye of our examiner, Richard Layton, who took a swab of that blood for analysis. And it was found to be a mixture of 2 persons' DNA, one being Mr Barmad, but that was only the minor component. The major component was from an unknown person. It appeared that the offender may have been cut and injured himself during the struggle.
For us, it's starting to get pretty exciting by this stage, because there we have 2 people, both wounded on the night that the cab drivers murdered, and 2 separate inquiries started to come together. And it was at that time that we thought that we had a psychopathic killer on our hands.
22-year-old Richard Leonard was a person of interest in the death of Stephen Dempsey, but that interest intensified when police discovered that he and his 19-year-old girlfriend had been injured on the same night that taxi driver Eddie Barmad was murdered.
We commenced surveillance on him, kept tabs on him, what he was doing, and we went as far as we could to check the background information that we'd received about him. And everyone that we spoke to that knew the man confirmed the behavioural patterns about him that we suspected he'd be showing. He seemed like a disturbed man.
As a result of that, we developed an investigative strategy which required us to eventually confront them and to interview them.
When we spoke to him in the house and introduced ourselves and conducted a search warrant there and told him that we suspected him for 2 murders, he was as cool as cool. We could have been door-to-door salesmen. We could have been a friend calling over. There was no appreciable fear, no concern, no outrage. That sort of suggestion would be put to him. I remember he sat down when he agreed to come to us to Manly Police Station. I think very, very calmly laced about a 32 lace Doc Marten boot, put both of them on, took all the time in the world. Very, 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 very cool. And do you agree that I told you that we were making inquiries in relation to the death of a man by the name of Stephen Dempsey?
Yes, that is correct.
Do you agree you told me you did not wish to say anything in terms of that matter?
Yes, that is correct.
Do you agree in other conversations we've had, you told me that you once had a bow and arrow when you were living at Excelsior Street, Coleroy Plateau?
Yes, that is correct.
Do you also agree you told me that the arrowheads you used were arrowheads called bodkins?
Bodkin.
Bodkins.
Bodkin, they are a tin alloy head comprising of 3 blades.
Right.
Like a tripod.
Okay, fine. Have you ever used broadheads?
No.
At all?
It was a key statement. Leonard was denying that he ever used broadhead arrows. It was a broadhead that was found in Stephen Dempsey's heart, and it was a broadhead that the 2 young men had identified when they were threatened at Deep Creek Reserve.
That obviously caused us to continue our inquiries, and as a result of previous information we'd received, we identified premises that he used to rent, and we canvassed the local neighbours who told us that he used to sit on the back porch and shoot arrows into an apple tree in the backyard. As a result of that, we examined that tree, and lo and behold, we find embedded underneath the bark, we stripped the bark off, and embedded underneath the bark we find arrowheads identical to the type that we located from the deceased.
Do you also agree that today you have provided us with samples of your hair and a blood sample?
Yes, that is correct.
Our purpose behind that was obviously to compare it with the blood sample we'd found at the murder of Mr. Barmad.
Do I have to find my own way home, or can I get a
The time is now 3:18 p.m. One final thing. Richard, do you agree with that jacket was at your house today?
Yes, I do.
Jacket. Oh, that's your jacket?
Yes.
He went home. We were in a position to know he spoke to his girlfriend straight away, and he left the house never to return.
We knew at that stage that we were on the right track, but there was no point in arresting this person and charging him without the evidence.
And that evidence was Leonard's blood sample, sent for DNA analysis.
The first test indicated to them that, yes, there was a likelihood that his blood sample specimen matched the one taken from the cab, but they had to go through further processes, and that would take a few more days. As you can imagine, we're extremely anxious at this stage. We're concerned that it will match, obviously, because if it doesn't match, we've just hit a brick wall and we have to go back to scratch.
The second test was positive, and then we reached the point where the night before the third test was due back, Richard Leonard called us up, said that he was the Christian City Church at Sydenham Road, Brookvale, and he wanted to speak to us, and he was with his girlfriend.
Leonard had made admissions to the pastor about his involvement in these crimes and wanted to give himself up to police.
They were each clutching a Bible, and he told me he'd shaved his head during the night as some cleansing process relative to, confessing all sins.
Police swooped on a church at Brookvale last night, arresting 19-year-old Denise Shipley and her 22-year-old boyfriend Richard Leonard.
On speaking to a pastor, he then made a phone call to the local authorities, and from there a arresting officer came down to the church.
Under heavy security, the couple was accused of killing cabbie Ezzardine Barmad. Leonard also charged with the murder of gardener Stephen Dempsey.
But while Richard Leonard admitted to murdering the taxi driver, he claimed that he killed Stephen Dempsey in self-defence.
I wanted him to be stopped. I didn't want him to come any closer to me. I felt threatened.
It was now up to the detectives and forensic specialists to prove him wrong.
All right. Do you agree, Mr. Leonard, I spoke to you last night, about the death of Mr. Dempsey?
Yes.
And do you agree you told me that indeed you were responsible for Mr. Dempsey's death by firing an arrow into his chest?
Yes, I believe I was responsible.
Right. And do you agree in the interview last night you told me that when you arrived you put your bow in a cave while you went further up the creek to see if there were any fish in the creek?
Yes.
That's correct?
That's right.
Mr. Leonard told us that whilst high on speed, he'd gone down to the deep creek with his compound bow, which he used to shoot fish in the creek. He'd left it in a cave, scattered along the creek to see if there were any mullet to shoot, came back and said he was then propositioned by Stephen Dempsey, who was in the cave and urinating at the time. You've gone into the cave there, you've seen Mr. Dempsey urinating, he smiled at you, you've come outside. What did you do then?
He stood over here and he said, "You're going to suck the guy's dick." And I said, "No," I picked up my bow and I pointed at him and I said, don't come over here, I'm going to shoot him." And he said, "I don't believe you." And then he said, "I'm going to walk towards you now." And he walked, he started coming towards me. And at about 10 feet, I let go of the string and the arrow went into him.
Was it your intention to kill Mr. Dempsey when you fired the arrow at him?
It wasn't my intention to kill anybody when I fired the arrow at him. I wanted him to be stopped. I didn't want him to come any closer to me. I felt threatened.
But the detectives did not believe his version of events. They believed Richard Leonard deliberately and callously killed Stephen Dempsey.
Everything we knew about a compound bow at that time suggested they were very, very powerful weapons, and most of the people that had shot them were of the opinion that a compound bow fired in such a way would have virtually gone straight through a person. In the case of Mr. Dempsey, that hadn't happened. The arrow had lodged fairly firmly in his heart, maybe halfway through the body. And that didn't correspond with the range and the power of the bow that Mr. Leonard had and the way he described it had occurred.
In an attempt to rebut Leonard's version of events, the team decided to reenact the scene using a pig carcass.
We obtained an identical bow, identical arrowheads, and we conducted a series of tests from varying distances.
Leonard had said he shot Mr. Dempsey from 10 feet, or 3 metres away. At that distance, the arrow went straight through the carcass.
The arrow that corresponded with the type of wound that Mr. Dempsey suffered was fired from a range of about 9 or 10 metres from memory, which was more than twice the distance that Richard Leonard was telling us he'd fired the arrow at. It suggested that what he was telling us wasn't right. It didn't make sense given the bow that he had.
And we were always of the belief that it resembled the stalking and hunting of a human being rather than a game animal. He used to go down there to hunt with his bow and shoot fish, and it sort of was a progression, if you like, from just hunting mere fish to stalking a human game and actually shooting him from a distance. Now, these tests, they were certainly not to the point scientifically that would be accepted as being irrefutable in court as evidence, but it was something that we had to do for ourselves.
The pig test wasn't allowed in court, but the jury did get to hear a taped conversation that showed Leonard wasn't threatened by Dempsey's homosexuality, as he had claimed.
In his interview, he was building a defence of provocation, which suggests that he'd been outraged by a homosexual advance made to him. but we'd had a recorded telephone call from Mr Leonard where he was attempting to get a job in a male brothel.
Yes, hello, my name is Richard. I'm just wondering if you have any positions vacant at the moment.
Yeah, we're always looking for people. Do you realise it's male to male, most of our work?
I do realise, yes.
What do you look like?
Okay, I'm around about 5'10", athletic build.
Right.
Around about a 6-inch cock. What else could I tell you?
Are you smooth or hairy?
Smooth.
Smooth, right. And how old are you?
22.
22. When can you come in for an interview?
So we knew that the perceived outrage or the fainted outrage didn't really have very much substance. Again, that put another hole in his in the story he was giving us.
Another tape presented to court was even more damning.
Some months after we charged Mr Leonard, police conducting another inquiry were able to provide us with a tape from the jail in which Mr Leonard just callously was bragging about the circumstances of killing Stephen Dempsey.
It's funny, he copped the fucking arrow, went straight in his fucking heart. Anyway, it was really funny. You should have seen space, right? There he is. He's just fucking, he's there, and all of a sudden, he just goes, he starts making this like a death noise sort of thing. You can't fucking believe what's happening. It's real funny, he just like, he's completely spun out. It's like, oh fuck, I can't believe it's come to this.
The account given in that tape certainly indicated a state of mind that was far more calculating, far more callous than the shocked, affronted, almost apologetic account that he gave in his record of interview at Manly.
And I realised that this guy's dead. And so I spin out and I grab the guy's legs and I pull him over to Deep Creek. And then he sank down into the water, and then I picked up my bow and like ran a few steps to get momentum, and then I threw it into the water.
And then of all things, he went to his mother's birthday party. After the party, he came back to Deep Creek with his trident boning knife. And in the middle of the night, he sat in Deep Creek and dismembered Mr Dempsey's remains.
I took out the knife, and it was very bright. I think I remember the moon. If it wasn't full, it was pretty close to it. But it was a bright night, and I took the knife and I cut into the leg, and I cut around the leg, and then I cut up into the joint. I used to work in an abattoir.
Yeah.
So I don't think unless I'd worked in this place, and I don't think I would have been able to do what I did.
He then put the limbs and the head in one bag and the torso in the other, and then did 2 separate trips on his motorcycle and took them back to where he was living. And he put the remains in his refrigerator where they were to stay for the next 3.5 months.
I just took everything out of the fridge and put everything in there, including his clothes.
On August the 2nd, 1994, Richard Leonard shot Stephen Dempsey with a bow and arrow. He then dismembered the body and put the remains in his fridge. 2 weeks later, the killer began a relationship with 18-year-old Denise Shipley.
I said, there is a person in the fridge. And she was quite shocked.
The two had known each other some years before when they attended the same church group. 4 years later, they discovered a mutual love of drugs and violence. And on the 17th of November 1994, that combination proved lethal.
The two went into the city, allegedly then under the influences of LSD. They've wandered around the city.
And we eventually found ourselves in Hyde Park, and then we decided we'd go home again. I only had enough money to catch a bus back, but Denise really wanted to get the taxi, so I said, okay, well, we'll get the taxi, but you realise it means we're going to have to get out and run away. So we got into this cab, and the driver was, what's his name?
The driver's name was Mr. Ezzedine Barmad.
Ezzedine Barmad.
Yes.
So the driver was Ezzedine Barmad. He said, where do you want to go? And I said, well, we want to go to Colorado Plateau.
He's then told us that he's didn't have the money to pay the fare, so he's pulled a knife out and put it to Mr. Barmad's throat. The way he describes it as just being, well, he didn't know what else to do.
I pulled out my knife from the inside pocket of my Nudgy jacket and put the point of the knife to the driver's neck. And said, don't move. At the time I said, don't move, he grabbed the knife out of my hand, and then everything got completely insane.
Mr. Barmad's grabbed the knife from him, they've struggled, and he's been able to stab him once to the chest.
And I got stabbed in the chest through my jacket.
By Mr. Barmad.
By Mr. Barmad.
Richard Leonard, who was a fairly strong bloke, has been able to grab the knife and has just, in a frenzy, attacked Mr. Barmad.
And I was wildly stabbing as I was trying to get into the front on top of him, and was stabbing everywhere.
What hand did you have the knife?
Would have been my right hand, and my knife was very sharp. So I had a steel that I used, and I always had my knife sharp. It was my favourite knife. Mm-hmm. And it actually cost me $90, that knife. And so you could get a tomato and slice it like a razor blade. It was really good.
At some stage during the struggle, Leonard left his calling card on the steering wheel. His fingerprints were confirmed as being the ones investigators found on the ignition key.
After receiving treatment at St Vincent's Hospital, Leonard and Shipley have returned home and realised that there could be some activity relative to the police, and they've then decided to discard Mr. Dempsey's remains. They've driven to Church Point, where we found the receipt where they hired the boat from the boat shed, little runabout, little tinny.
So did they come down here in the boat?
Yes.
She crashed in the sandbag somewhere around here, you indicated. What did you do then?
I got her to go for a walk, and I carried two parcels in sheets down and put them into the boat with wire ties and a pair of pliers.
And what were those two parcels you were referring to?
They were the remains of Mr. Dempsey.
Leonard's pulled some rocks from the shore, put those in the boat, and as he's made his way into Pittwater, he's wired the rocks to the torso.
There's only one thing I know that I can absolutely say as a fact, and that was that there was no residential dwellings in the place where I stopped, and I drifted. So, to my mind, logic, I would say that I stopped here.
He's thrown the remains over the side of the boat and then returned the boat, cleaned the boat out, and they've gone home.
3 weeks later, the torso surfaced and Leonard's perfect crime came undone.
Without that arrowhead, there's a very good possibility, without an admission of guilt from somebody, that we never ever would have solved it, because it was the one piece of evidence that led us to the offender.
Richard Leonard's trial for the murder of Stephen Dempsey lasted 12 days.
The court was told how, as a child, Leonard had spent his school holidays with his grandmother, chopping off the ears and tails of little kittens. And when he ran out of kittens to mutilate, his grandmother would just buy him more.
It's always nail-biting, waiting for a jury to return. In this case, the jury was out for 4 days. The team were on edge. But more than anything, I think we really felt for the family of the two victims on this occasion. It was very, very tough for them.
The judge described Richard William Leonard as the epitome of evil.
Richard Leonard is only 24 years old, but a judge has decided he must spend the rest of his life in prison for killing New Zealander Stephen Dempsey and taxi driver Esdeen Barmad.
We're very happy.
Very happy.
Yeah, thank you.
Family friends of the taxi driver, stabbed 37 times by Leonard 3 years ago, say the life imprisonment is deserved.
I love to see him, suffer, like us, like the children he left behind.
In sentencing Leonard, Justice Badgery Parker said imposing life imprisonment was a very serious step, but the fact that Richard Leonard had killed 2 people and been diagnosed as a psychopath meant he'd always be a risk to the community.
His girlfriend, Denise Shipley, was sentenced to a minimum of 3 years and a maximum of 8 for her involvement as an accessory after the fact to both murders.
The result when it came through, well, they were elated. It was a huge release of a burden for them, and certainly the never-to-be-released sentence. That was everything they could have hoped for. We were never going to bring their son or father back, but as the team we were able to give them everything we certainly could in terms of the way we went round our job.
Franny, where are you?
Fred!
4 members of this young woman's family would never be seen alive again. Inside the house was evidence that would not only lead investigators to the killer,
it was a callous, outright murder,
but would uncover a secret buried for 3 years.
My concern was if he had in fact got away with it, it resulted in the deaths of the other 4 that should never have occurred.
There were questions that needed to be answered. We did it because we had to know.
We couldn't establish how it would have happened. It just couldn't have happened the way he said it did.
If you look at the skull damage in these, that's not consistent with that.
and that, in his mind, was his way of, I suppose, explaining what he'd done.
And the further we went, the worse it got for him.
For 3 days, members of the Milosevic family had been trying to contact Rad Miller, or Rad, as she liked to be called. But calls to Rad and her de facto husband, Tony, had gone unanswered. And for a family who spoke to each other every day, it was a matter of deep concern.
There was a phone call made from Tony's employer that he hadn't turned up for work for a couple of days, and they were quite concerned as it wasn't like Tony not to be at work. The car was in the driveway and nobody came to the door, and Dara started to get a bit worried.
Dara was Rad's 18-year-old sister.
She looked through the window and noticed some paper burnt around the stove, and the stove was actually glowing, the hot plates on the stove. She wanted to break the window and go in, but her boyfriend stopped her and told her that they would call the police and get the police there. He didn't want her to go in.
I was on duty in Canberra on the 31st of March 1984 with another detective, another young detective, and we were the only two detectives on in Canberra for that particular day. I received a call on the police radio from our operations room that the police officer in attendance had smashed a hole with his baton in the back door of the house and entered. There was a strong smell of petrol in the house. It was obvious that there was an attempt to set the place on fire. In one of the back bedrooms, there were 3 bodies, 2 adults, male and female, and a small girl. They'd been piled up and they'd been doused in petrol. And in another bedroom, there was a young male child, obviously all victims of gunshot wounds. We were only young people 20 years ago ourselves, and we all had young children as well, so it was pretty horrific, you know.
I was actually elsewhere with another sister, Rad's other sister, and we were in a nightclub at the time, and a friend had come up and said to the other sister that something terrible had happened to Rad and Tony, that we had to leave.
An entire family had been wiped out. Radmila Milosevic, her de facto husband Tony Baker, and their 2 small children, Danny and Lisa, were dead.
When they took us to Richardson, they made us wait in the car. The house was all taped around, and somebody had come out and told Rad's sister that they'd been shot and they were found in the house, Rad, Tony and the kids. She was just out of her mind. She just was screaming and so upset after going through it 2 years previously, losing Marion and Lily.
Tragedy had already struck the Milosevic family. Mariana and Lily, Radmila's younger sisters, died just before New Year's Eve of 1981 in a car accident.
You couldn't comprehend another 4 from the same family, Marion and Lily, and now Rad and Tony and the kids. It was just unbelievable.
The surrounding the case, they say, are extremely unusual. The police broke into this house at about 9:30 last night to find the bodies of a young man, a young woman and their 2 small children. The bodies were all in various parts of the house. There was no sign of any struggle, but kerosene had been doused on the walls.
There was no break and enter on the house. The house had been locked up. There were no broken windows. It was quite calm as far as that was concerned. And there was evidence that the offender had attempted to clean up blood stains with a bottle of Jif from the kitchen. And in their attempts to clean it up, they'd made more of a mess, so that the person just put cushions over the blood stains and sort of hid things.
The murderer also tried to hide his tracks by attempting to set fire to the house.
The stove consisted of 2 small hot plates towards the back of the range, and at the front of the range was a sort of a square grill-type hot plate arrangement. And the 2 back hot plates were glowing red hot, but not the front one. The person who turned the stove on had, in their haste, had turned all the knobs the same way, and the hot plate at the front where he'd stuffed newspaper around the grill didn't ignite because the switch was turned in the wrong direction. It was on low instead of high.
The scientific squad has been trying to piece together some story or pattern. They believe the shooting could have taken place as long ago as Friday.
But a search inside the house suggested it could have been earlier. The failed attempt to burn down the house meant that Radmila's diary remained intact, a diary she wrote up religiously every night.
And it was just an old school book that she used to write up the day's events in. And the last entry was dated Wednesday, the 28th of March. And the entry was that her husband and a guy called Tomo were listening to the radio for the football that was on the midweek game. And that was the last entry. So we knew we had another person in the house at that time, the last time that the people were obviously alive.
This morning, from their mobile field unit, the police conducted a door knock, but very few of the neighbours knew anything about the family, and none of them had heard any of the gun blasts.
But people had seen a distinctive car travelling backwards and forwards to the house after the Wednesday. and we had some information there that indicated that perhaps that car might have belonged to the person Tomo. So we needed to find out who Tomo was and where Tomo was now.
Police investigations are continuing into this evening. They're still interviewing the family's friends and relatives, but haven't determined even a possible motive.
It had now been some hours since the bodies of Rad, Tony and their children had been found shot dead in their home. With no known reason as to why they were murdered, detectives needed to speak with the last person who had seen them alive. And that was a bloke called Tomo.
We eventually identified Tomo as a guy called Alan Thompson, who was a close family friend. In fact, he was a long-term mate of the male victim of the scene. I think they used to play football together.
He was my big brother. He was do anything for me, trusted him. I guess he was the big brother I never had, and he was one of the family. I think he actually taught me to drive at 13, 14 years of old illegally along the road, and he'd drive us to a school disco. He'd go home and he'd come back and pick us up when we were finished. So we were always with Tomo.
Other diary entries indicated that this Tomo had turned up on a regular basis and he would play with the kids, and there were some comments in there about him eating all of their food. So we knew that he was a regular visitor to the house. He was also a boyfriend of one of the two sisters who were killed in a road vehicle accident some years prior.
Tomo met Mariana one night. Him and a friend were chucking laps of the main street, and Mariana and one of her sisters were in the city, and they happened to pull over and start speaking to them and talking, and I guess it just went from there.
Before long, the young couple moved in together and were hardly ever seen apart. So when Mariana died in a car crash less than 2 years later, Alan turned to her elder sister Rad and her de facto husband Tony for company. Most of his days and nights were spent here at their house.
We also established that he owned a motor vehicle similar to the description of the one that the neighbours had told us about, that was coming and going from the premises.
So was Tomo a possible suspect, or simply the last person to see his friends alive?
My partner and I travelled to Queanbeyan and were actually greeted at the door by Alan. And when I introduced myself and said who I was, I'm the bearer of bad news. I said, I've just come from the house of your friends in Richardson. We found them all dead.
At the crime scene, ballistics experts had found spent casings and bullets that indicated the murder weapon was a .22 calibre rifle.
He was asked whether he owned a rifle. He took us to a shed in the back of his parents' home, where he unlocked it and produced a .22 rifle. And we came back to Canberra to police headquarters and handed the gun over to our ballistics expert.
All right. Check and clear? Great. Thanks, Eric.
They took us to the local police station and then proceeded to question us on Tomo, asking us if he had guns or if, was there any reason why, we would think that it would be him. And I just said Tomo wouldn't do it. Tomo didn't do it. He wouldn't do something like that.
At the forensic laboratory, the ballistic expert fired bullets from Thompson's gun. Under the microscope at 20 magnifications, the bullets were then compared to those found at the crime scene to either identify or eliminate the rifle Thompson had given to the police.
What we're looking at is a test sample on the left-hand side and the exhibit on the right-hand side, and we're looking for lines that are created by marks that are left on the interior of the barrel and the land itself, and they emboss those particulate marks on the lands. They're a unique set of marks because they're like a ballistic fingerprint. So they're unique only to this one particular firearm, and that allows us to make an identification or an elimination. In this case, we've made an identification.
It was the following day that we had some information come forward from our inquiries that Thompson had gone to a petrol station in the outskirts of Queanbeyan and purchased a tin of petrol. That tin was actually found at the crime scene, and it was him coming back to the scene that the neighbours saw the car. So it became obvious that Alan Thompson was our offender, and we subjected him to interview, produced the evidence, and initially he denied any involvement in the murders of those people. But then he said, I went out to the car and got the gun and just come inside and just started shooting. But he said he didn't know what he was doing, he was just randomly firing throughout the house. Well, that didn't match with the scene that the ballistic expert had recreated. It was more deliberate firing and aiming rather than just shooting around wantonly and not knowing what you were doing.
As the bullet exits the muzzle of a gun, the pressure behind it blows gunshot residue through the barrel and into the air.
You can just confirm that's hard up against contact.
The closer the rifle to the target, the more concentrated the gunshot residue around the bullet entry hole.
Firing!
The further away, the less dense it becomes. So when the experts compared the results they got from Thompson's gun to the gunshot residue around the bullet holes of his victims, they were able to establish how far away Thompson was from each family member when he pulled the trigger.
Firing!
We established that, I think the ballistics expert established that the offender had first fired from the entry hallway of the house across to where an armchair was in the lounge room where the woman was sitting with the young girl on her lap. It's then that the husband started to lift himself up from the chair, and the offender shot him then in the chest, and he then tried to get out of the lounge room, and he went around a small wall into the hallway, and he was shot then at point blank range to the back of the head. And then the little girl who had obviously fallen off her mother's lap, she was shot in the lounge room on the floor from a short distance, and we believe that he dragged those bodies up the hallway then and piled them up in the back bedroom. And then at some stage that night, the male child was shot in bed at point blank range. So it was a callous, outright murder.
24-year-old Thompson was charged with 4 counts of murder, but pleaded not guilty at the trial.
I didn't want to believe that Tomo did it. It was mainly sitting in court and listening to the evidence and the forensic evidence, everything that went with the case.
Thompson was found guilty and was sentenced to 4 terms of life imprisonment to be served concurrently.
And we never ever found out the motive for the murder. But I think following the death of his girlfriend, he sort of attached himself to Rad Miller, and I don't have the qualifications to talk about people and why they do certain things, so I don't know. I just think that there was from what I've seen and from what I've read in her diary, I think that Tomo was a little bit infatuated with Rad Miller for whatever reason, and she was rejecting that advancement.
But it wasn't over for Tomo. One policeman had a gut feeling that would likely turn Thompson into one of Australia's worst killers of the time.
Going through photo albums in the house, we found newspaper reports involving the deceased 2 sisters who'd been killed some years before in a motor vehicle accident.
The 2 girls, aged 14 and 17, died when this car left the road and slammed into a tree. They were incinerated as the car's fuel tank exploded.
An inquest found it was an accident. The car hit a tree and burst into flames. The driver, who escaped unhurt, was close family friend Alan Thompson.
The concern was if he had in fact got away with it, it resulted in the deaths of the other 4 that should never have occurred.
When Alan Thompson gunned down Radmila Milosevic and her family, investigators discovered that he was also the driver in a car crash that took the lives of her 2 younger sisters. Was it sheer coincidence that Thompson's name was linked to the deaths of 3 sisters? Or was there more to it than met the eye?
Thompson alleged that he'd been driving towards Canberra, Coomera to Canberra, on the highway, the two girls in the car.
What about the ice cream party? Yeah, I have some ice cream. You didn't get that.
High beam of another oncoming vehicle caused him to veer off the road. He immediately got out of the car, the driver's side. He went to the front of the vehicle and saw flames coming from under the bonnet. He ran around to the left-hand side of the vehicle and attempted to get the girls out of the vehicle. He was engulfed in flames, and subsequently the two girls died in a motor vehicle accident.
I was contacted at work and said that Marianne and Lily had died in the accident and Tomo had been burned. Tomo had burns to his arms, lower arms, where he had tried to get the girls out. The day of the funeral, he was very withdrawn. He wouldn't speak to anybody. A few of us went up to put our arms around him and he more or less pushed us away and he was just very reserved. He'd sometimes wake up through the night screaming out for Mariana, and we just tried to be there for him.
2 months after the girls' funeral, a coronial inquiry into the crash found the deaths of the sisters to be accidental. But Rick Nines and his partner Tom McQuillan had their doubts.
Right, the brief told us that there'd been a motor vehicle accident, simple motor vehicle accident. Looking at the brief, there weren't sufficient answers to say, well, yes, this was a simple motor vehicle accident. There were questions that needed to be answered in order to corroborate his story.
We were very fortunate. The accident squad at the time took a lot of photographs of the vehicle accident, and when you looked at the photographs, I was concerned that the damage didn't correlate with the high impact alleged by Thompson at the time.
Travelling at the speed that he said he was travelling, one would have thought that there would have been a lot more damage, and there was insufficient damage.
Thompson said he was driving at 45 miles, or 60 kilometres per hour, when he was blinded by headlights and went off the road, hitting a tree. But according to experts from General Motors Holden, this could not have been the case.
Now, that was quickly diffused by the engineers who said that didn't hold water. They weren't happy with that story at all. And they looked at the photographs and they all put the impact speed down to about 15 mile per hour.
So that said, well, why would someone do that? Would it be to protect themselves possibly? And maybe the accident had been staged. So we decided to test our theory out that it was a staged accident and to see what sort of damage would occur by rolling the vehicle into a tree, because we didn't have the tree out at the site, it had been cut down.
So we bought an HR Holden and we took it to the police driver training area and we got it on a slope. And we marked the distance between a tree that we believe met the dimensions of the tree on the highway, and then we ran the vehicle down towards the tree on a large number of occasions to get the speed right, and the distance had to be spot on to recreate the 15 mile per hour speed on impact.
We had it all planned. Everyone had their role. I think my role was to time it from memory. Rick's was to observe. And we had a driver who was rigged up, all padded up, crash helmet light, ready to crash it in. But once he'd seen how far we were going down the slope and the speed, there was a little bit of, well, perhaps this might be a bit dangerous. So he sort of reneged, and it was left for volunteers, and the only volunteer left was Rick Ninnis.
Well, I believed it had to be done. Someone had to do it, so I was the man at the time, so I had to do it.
He was placed in the vehicle and sent off on his way and crashed it into the tree.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, go!
But it was probably important I did do it, actually, because it gave me a feel for what actually transpired in that car. And the impact was not severe at all. You certainly knew you'd hit something, but it wasn't severe enough that you would think 2 people would die. So it was supported very much so that was about the speed the vehicle was travelling when Thompson hit the tree with the 2 girls in it.
In our minds, we had to be certain exactly what was going on. If we weren't certain, how could we show that to someone else? We did it because we had to know.
But while the similarities between the crash test and the damage to Thompson's car did put a dent in his story, it wasn't anywhere near enough evidence to overturn the original verdict of accidental death. For that, they would need to get answers from an arson expert. Had the car burst into flames? Or was it deliberately lit?
And they locked me up for a day in a room with the video and the photos and said, we'll be back at 4 o'clock, tell us what you think.
When Detective Rick Nines began his journey into whether Thompson's accident was indeed what he claimed, he never expected that he'd be putting his own safety on the line. And yet, it wasn't enough to prove Thompson was a fake or a murderer. His focus was now on the fire that incinerated the girls and how it really started.
The coroner's initial finding was that the fire had started under the bonnet of the car. An explanation for the fire was that there's a spring sitting across the battery to hold it down. It actually had contact with one of the terminals and arced, causing a spark to ignite the fumes under the bonnet. Now, photographs where the vehicle's on the back of a tow truck going away still indicated the headlights are on.
Now, that would seem a little bit incongruous if the battery is supposed to have started the fire. If you look at the damage in the engine compartment where the fire was supposedly started, you see some heat damage to the hoses and the wiring, but you don't see any actual burning. A lot of the wiring would be just bare wiring if it did survive at all, that you wouldn't have any insulation on the wiring. I'd expect the hoses and the fan belts to be burned away. They would have to for a fire to burn that long to get through the firewall. In fact, there are parts of the firewall that haven't been affected by the fire at all.
The damage from the fire seemed to be more inside the vehicle rather than in the motor. The motor seemed to be still in working order for a fire of that velocity. So it didn't add up. Why is there a fire inside the cabin, but yet the engine seems to be okay, and that's where the fire was alleged to have started.
Thompson had alleged that within minutes, seconds of him getting out of the car, the fire had spread from the engine to the passenger compartment. So, to corroborate or reject his story, the detectives decided to replicate the fire.
You got the stopwatch going?
Thank you, mate, mobile board.
I'm here. Pretty good fire. That's what we wanted.
Starting to drip through now at the bottom. It starts to drip.
That's got more oxygen food in it too.
We initially poured that petrol under the bonnet, what we thought would have been the amount spilled out of a carburetor.
There you go, Tom.
There you go.
40 seconds.
That petrol certainly did ignite after we put flame to the petrol, but it extinguished itself very quickly because it couldn't travel anywhere. And we subsequently added more fuel and kept trying to do it to try and get that vehicle to be engulfed in flames to a large extent. But you virtually had to douse that car in petrol to get it to ignite.
That's a bit more like it.
And that took quite an amount to be able to get it through the firewall of the vehicle and into the cabin.
You on, Tommy? 4.5 minutes. The wiring out of the dash, it's got to get that. Got to burn that away. The dash is the thing that'll really start to smoke.
Cars will catch fire, but it's a fairly high impact speed that will do it to rupture all the fuel lines, the fuel tank,
And to get it up and running to a high burning degree, you've got to have a lot of accelerant around it to fuel the flames.
15 minutes now. Yeah, 15 minutes.
So to support Thompson's story that in fact within a few seconds of the vehicle impacting he had a car totally on fire, but we couldn't establish how it would have happened. It just couldn't have happened the way he said it did.
But what we also found was that there would have been time for someone to get out. This was the other thing. That was the reason why the firewall was there.
You reckon you get one up inside the car at the 30-minute mark?
And by timing it, we thought, well, no, it just doesn't add up again. Another part of his story, not being able to get in. You should have been able to get in because it took us quite some amount of petrol to be able to say that the cabin would have caught fire. 45 minutes is up. Right.
In his original statement following the collision in 1982, Thompson claimed the container he was carrying in the car was empty. But when detectives Nines and McQuillan confronted Thompson with their doubts about his version of events,
Changed his story slightly, but only slightly, just enough to give us a reason why there was accelerant in his vehicle and why a fire should have occurred.
he told them that he'd bought the petrol for his mum's lawnmower in the afternoon and had forgotten to give it to her.
He said it was in the car and it must have fallen over and caught on fire.
Thompson didn't say anything at the time because he didn't want to get blamed for firing the car. So, were the detectives barking up the wrong tree? Or were their instincts right? The answer was right under their nose. But they were yet to see it. Alan Thompson initially claimed there was no petrol in his car the night his girlfriend and her younger sister were incinerated in a motor vehicle accident. 3 years later, he changed his story, saying he did have a container of petrol in the car and it must have fallen over. So, had Thompson lied because he didn't want to be blamed for the fire? Or had he perjured himself at the inquest for another reason?
If you look at a photo of the tree where the car was wrapped around the tree, you'll see that there's a fire below the level of the vehicle. Now, how could that possibly happen if the fire was in the engine bay? It's more consistent, and the photo actually shows this, of a flammable liquid spill running and burning down through the folds of the metal where the car's been damaged. Obviously, I can't say exactly how much petrol had been used, but what I can say is it would have to be in the order of litres inside and outside. So you're looking at quite a few litres of petrol spread around inside and outside that vehicle.
The case was getting stronger and stronger as we went, and we believe we were heading towards a prima facie case against Thompson.
But the most damning indication that the accident was a cover-up was hidden among the photos that had papered the walls of the detective's office for the last 6 months.
You can look at something for quite a long time and not notice something. And all of a sudden it hit us that looking at the females, we noticed that there was some unexplained fluid escaping from the skull.
One of the photographs had a distinct round hole in one of the skulls, and we kept looking at it. Suddenly we become very curious about this hole.
If you look at the photos very closely, it's not all that clear, but you can see that there's a lot of damage to the skulls. Now, it is reported both at crematoriums and I believe in the Russian Revolution that you can get skulls exploding in fires. And when that happens, it's mainly because the fire is very quick and very hot. There's tremendous steam pressure builds up in the cranium, and therefore only one thing can happen, the skull will blow open. Now, if you look at the skull damage in these, that's not consistent with that. They look to me like exit wounds of projectiles, in other words, bullets, and at least in one of the skulls, an entry wound that was very strongly suggestive that these two girls had been shot in the head.
In the Supreme Court today, the tragic story of 3 Canberra sisters unfolded. The Director of Public Prosecutions, Stephen Dempsey QC, said merely the fact that Thompson had been convicted of the murder of one of the sisters was enough to order a new inquest into the deaths of the other 2. He said such an inquest would allay public disquiet and set the record straight. Mr Dempsey said new expert evidence contradicted Thompson's version of the crash, how fast he was going and where in the car the fire started. He said Thompson had now admitted he was carrying a container of petrol and previously he'd denied that. Dennis Palmer, for Thompson, said the evidence was not new nor of substance and pointed to the cost of holding a new inquest.
The only thing left to do was to exhume the bodies and see if there were any forensic evidence available from the bodies.
Now, if Thompson's story is right, there should have been burning or scarring of the larynx inside the bodies and the lungs of the young girls if they were alive, even though they might have been unconscious. We certainly needed that sort of evidence to substantiate a charge to homicide against him.
That order was given, the exhumation was undertaken, and subsequently an examination of those bodies revealed gunshot wounds.
Bullet wounds were found in one or both of the sisters' bodies after they were exhumed from the Gun Garland Cemetery.
Bullet wounds that were consistent with being from a .22 calibre rifle. The same calibre Alan Thompson used when he murdered the girl's older sister, Rad Miller, and her family.
At the post-mortem examination, the doctor found that there was no burning in the larynx or the internal organs and established beyond doubt that they both were deceased at the time of the fire. Forensic Service also found that there was a coating of lead which was left behind as a bullet passed through the skull, inside the skull. So it totally supported the fact that the girls had been shot at or in the vehicle. They'd been deceased prior to the fire of the vehicle.
So in fact, by pulling that brief, just as out of mere interest for a start off, it just built. And it became a rolling ball for us. And the further we rolled it, the greater the divergence.
But what really went on the night the 2 girls were murdered? What triggered Thompson to shoot his girlfriend and her younger sister?
Leading up to the accident, Mariana came to work and spoke to her sister. It was basically the only time she really told us that she was scared of him.
Mariana Milosevic and Alan Thompson were boyfriend and girlfriend. When she died in a car accident, where he was the driver, Thompson turned to her older sister, Rad Miller, for comfort. 15 months later, he killed her and her family. With Thompson's name linked to both events, police and forensic investigators re-examined the car crash that had been written off as an accident. Alan Thompson's secret was exposed, and the truth of what really happened that fatal night was finally uncovered.
He's talking shit now. Can you just stop yelling at her?
I'll do what I want, all right?
Excuse me.
The younger sister had come over to stay with them for the weekend.
Why are you being such an arsehole for?
And there'd been some sort of pending separation. The young girl wanted to break off with him, and he really didn't want that to occur. We believe that the young girl was there to be a witness or support her sister in the breakup.
I think he killed the girls in the car because Mariana wanted to leave him. Mariana had come into work and said that, you know, he was starting to frighten and she was getting scared of him and she didn't want to be with him anymore. Maybe if he wasn't going to have her, nobody was. Why he decided to take Lily, to take Rad, to take Tony and the children, I don't know.
Well, there's a definite connection, a modus operandi on what he was doing in both murders. There was a 22 involved in headshots in the victims, and the fact that there was fire used in both occasions to conceal the crime. So we believe there's a distinct correlation between the two offences.
2 years after he murdered the family, and 4 years after the original inquest into the deaths of the girls, Alan Thompson was found guilty of deliberately killing his girlfriend Mariana and her sister Lily.
He fooled a lot of people. He came across as the nice guy, the caring guy, and the Milosevic family trusted Tomo. Tomo was like their own, but they knew after the Richardson murders that he was responsible.
Thompson was given a life sentence for each girl's murder, to be served concurrently with the 4 already imposed.
I got the most satisfaction when Mr. Thompson was convicted, because it was finalisation for the Milosevic family. I felt really sorry and deeply on their behalf, because here was a lady that had lost so many members of her family for no valid reason.
She lost out of her family 3 daughters, a son-in-law and 2 grandchildren. It was fairly horrific for one mother who fought and battled and brought those children up on her own all that time, to have this cove come along and just take them away like he did.
Life for them now is 20-odd years later, it's still like yesterday to them. I mean, I know that there's not a day that goes by that any of them that are left don't think of Rad, Tony, the kids, Lily, Mariana. He's really hurt them and really destroyed their family. My thoughts of Tomo are completely different to my thoughts of when I was a young teenager. I don't like him anymore. I hate him, I guess, as much as they do for what he's done to them.
In their own way, the family and Bronwyn have erased Alan Thompson from their lives.
Tomo's name was put on Mariana's headstone. It had "Loved by Alan." They believed then that she was very much loved by him and him by her, but the name was removed. It was scratched off.
We no longer exist for an eye in our society today, and you can't bring people back, you can't turn the clock back. But I think people in society today like to see those who are involved in those sorts of crimes to be punished.
Thompson has been behind bars for the last 20 years and is currently serving his time in a minimum security prison.
Hopefully, people like that should never be released back into society.
Alan Thompson's a cold fish with no emotion. There is nothing inside of him, I don't believe. Yes, the best description I could give you is just a cold fish.
A routine early morning walk for one man, but this day would be unlike others. His dog would not only uncover a skull, but a past that one killer thought he buried forever.
Here we had a person who was sticking his thumbs up at society and saying, I've got away with this. The system's about to take him on.
I wasn't sure whether he'd gone overseas, gone underground, or just didn't want to be found.
We only get one go at forensics. We can't go back and put bodies back and re-dig them.
Having everything intact, then getting an X-ray meant it was almost like X-raying a living person.
He was making allegations even at that stage that it was a police set-up.
It looked like something from a movie.
The skull, dead set, had a really long, thin face. I thought this could be Harvey.
He thought he'd got away with it. Cold. He thought he'd be right.
And it was going to be a fight to the end.
When a human skull was found on this beach, there was little doubt the victim had been murdered. But it was what happened 6 months before that discovery that would be vital in solving this case. The killer had boasted that even if police found his victim, they would never prove he was the murderer. But these were no bare bones.
Botany Bay was a crime scene today after a human skull was found buried in a sandbank. A man walking his dog made the grim discovery.
He was quite taken aback, rather shocked, and he went home to settle down with a cup of tea. I think it was rather unexpected on a Sunday morning.
While the victim's identity remains a mystery, police here have called in Task Force Snowy, the special team of detectives investigating a series of gangland murders dating back to the 80s.
What we had here was a crime scene, and we all know from experience that crime scenes leave clues. The trick is to find the clues. So we had to, one, get the remains out, and secondly, preserve any forensic capacity that was there. With an encroaching tide later that day, we knew we were on time limits.
The tide had already uncovered the top of his skull, so it may undermine the area where we had to dig. And I spoke to Lyle at the scene and said, I think we need to put some form of protection in so we weren't going to lose what could have been vital information and vital evidence.
With the tide coming so close to the skull could well have been washed away. So we built a sandbag area around the skeleton and backfilled the entire area with sifted sand to stabilise the skull. Because we only get one go at forensics, we can't go back and put bodies back and re-dig them. It is absolutely imperative that everything is addressed first time round.
Task Force Snowy had recently received a tip-off that a particular murder victim from the 1980s had been buried in this very spot.
There may have been fired cartridge cases in there, projectiles, any of the ID from the deceased, like a wallet or anything else that may have been discarded by the murderers, the firearm itself. So we had to make sure that we didn't miss any of that evidence.
The skeleton is approximately 5 feet below the surface of the soil of the embankment. Currently, members of the rescue squad and a backhoe operator are removing the vegetation on top of where the skeleton is located. The backhoe operator removed all the sand from the top of the body, and when we got to a level where we believed that we should start digging by hand, there was still a large amount of sand there, so we got him to use the backhoe scoop, and he started scooping away, and unfortunately the first scoop of sand, out came this brown tan shoe, hooked on the fork of the backhoe. Well, I was not happy about that.
Yeah, when they hooked onto his shoe, I thought, oh no, they might have ripped him about a bit.
Obviously we stopped digging at that stage, and from there on in we went down very slowly by hand.
It's now 5:20 p.m. We've removed the overburden to the level of the sandbags that we established earlier on today. These 3 blue arrows here indicate the location of the skeletal head, approximately here. We'll continue digging down until we uncover the remains. The closer we got to the body, the smaller the implements we started using. We eventually ended up using paintbrushes and spoons to actually dig the sand away from the remains so as not to damage them. Time's now 8:25 p.m, Sunday the 26th of March 1995. The skeletal remains have now been fully uncovered. The left foot was recovered earlier today, and as you can see it's missing from the body at this point in time. And there appears to be some broken bones in the vicinity of the right wrist. A leather belt around the waist of the deceased. There appears to be some corroded metal, which possibly could have been a buckle. It looked like something from a movie, but here we were dealing with it in real life. 1.895 with his head in the position he is.
We were able to dig down underneath the body. There was a bit of a seal between the remains and the sand, and we broke that seal by 2 police officers tying a piece of string to their hands and just moving it down underneath the body. So once that had occurred, we then positioned a bodyboard under those remains.
It's coming through. You passed the pelvis, yeah?
I was very worried when we started sliding that spinal board under there because things started moving, sand started crumbling, and I thought, this is not going to work. But the more we persevered, the better it came together, and it did actually work.
We were then able to lift it up and place it into a body bag and head it down to the mortuary. At that stage, all we had as skeletal remains, partially dressed in some clothing, full stop.
But these bones would tell a story. Within the skeleton were clues to its identity, and that of the killer. When a skull was found buried deep within a sand dune, a special task force of detectives were called into the site by the local police.
There were a number of police there, including one of the botany detectives. He said, "Oh, we found one of your bodies." I said, "Oh, that's great, mate. Which one?"
This area was considered a dumping ground for gangland murders of the 80s, and this may be one of its victims.
He took me over and showed me the skull. And this skull, dead set, had a really long, thin face. And I thought this could be Harvey. And I don't want this to sound derogatory, but having known Harvey, he had a very thin, long face.
Harvey Jones was a minor criminal. He was a glorified thief. He was a would-be gangster.
He was well dressed, well turned out, dripping in gold. He was a mug wear, and he was as fresh as a rat with the gold teeth. He went missing. His mother was very upset. His sisters were very upset. There was a very basic investigation done by police at the time. Because of the people he mixed with, we wasn't sure whether he'd gone overseas, gone underground, moved interstate, or just didn't want to be found.
Got him? Got a hand or you're right?
We needed a positive identification of the human remain. So it was okay for us to suppose that it was Harvey Jones, but we had to prove it to a coroner, and we also had to prove that he was murdered.
Given the nature of the case where police suspected foul play, it was very important to examine the body in its entirety and to be as comprehensive as possible. So literally, you want to have as much material as you can.
The first thing that was done was to take an X-ray of the remains, obviously to find anything which might be inside which would be of interest.
The X-rays showed tiny fragments of foreign material that was consistent with the outside casing of a fired projectile. And the 2 projectiles that we recovered were quite deteriorated, but nevertheless they were consistent with having been fired into that body.
The suspicion that the victim had been shot was right on the money, but whether it was Harvey Jones or another gunshot victim was still up in the air. There was no fingerprints or DNA available, but what had weathered the years was the dead man's clothing, still hanging on his skeleton.
It was amazing to see how much of the clothing was still intact. The cardigan was still there. You could clearly see the side seams of where the jeans had been. The buttons still had all their markings on them. The cardigan was one of those ones that had the leather patches on it, and you could see where the leather patches had been. The nylon fabrics, the interfacing and lining of the cardigan was 100% intact. You could almost move the zipper on it.
One of the things that had been reported when Harvey went missing in 1983, that he was wearing a particular brand shirt, Fuss, F-U-S, and that shirt had been obtained from overseas in a place called Qatar and had been sent to him by his sister. But that by itself was not conclusive. Clothing per se is unreliable. People can change clothing and there's always more than one shirt in existence, so it's not conclusive. We needed to go much further than that.
Well, we thought we'd identify him by dental records to start with, so we went along to the dentist and said, you know, have you got the records of Harvey? And they said, oh, no, he was seen here 7 years and 1 week away when we've destroyed the records, because you've only got to keep them by statute for 7 years. So I said to the detectives we could carry out this video superimposition. So we just got that centred now, that ball joint centred around where his front teeth are, because they showed me a photograph and it had teeth in it, smiling teeth. So we've got something to actually match up, because we had the teeth on the skull and the teeth on the photographs. Head down a bit more, head down, head down, head down. Yeah, that's getting close, coming in. That'll be very close now. So you can use 2 television cameras to overlay the teeth from the photograph to the teeth on the skull. Now we're overlaying the premolars to start with, then across to this canine with this very unusual worn-off canine, with the next tooth with the lateral tooth, which is usually a lot smaller, and then coming across to these front teeth with a V chip in them, and then across to the lateral on the other side. Then you can look for the rest of the skull for outline of soft tissue to see if it matches. Looking at from the right side to the left side, the outline of the orbit, the eye position, then coming across to the left-hand side, you're looking at the bony outline. You can see on the soft tissue relative to the bone where that large lump of bone is above the eye.
And as they crossed, it just jumped out of you. It was Harvey. It was quite disconcerting, slightly creepy, a bit like a horror movie where the face melts away and you've got the skull left. It was like Harvey's face had jumped out of the skull at you.
At that point, we had the first positive identification that would stand scrutiny in any form, in any court, that the person that we dug up was Harvey Jones.
But who had killed the 29-year-old man 12 years before? The task force was in possession of other vital evidence, evidence that would put them hot on the heels of the killer. 29-year-old Harvey Jones had vanished in 1983. His clothed skeleton was found 12 years later. Its identity only confirmed through one photo that had survived over the years.
It was quite a wonderful photograph. It was of some individuals having lunch, and there was the lobster in front of them, the glass of Chardonnay, a fairly bulky bloke on one side, Harvey Jones on the other side.
That bulky bloke linking arms with Harvey was his best mate, Neddy Smith, who was one of the most well-known and feared criminals in the 1980s.
Neddy was a career criminal, a long history of convictions for thieving, assaults, robberies, armed robberies. A large man, physically overpowering. The only way you'd hold him down would be with a piece of 4x2 around the ears. He was a very violent character, very mean, just a vile creature.
But he had some powerful friends.
According to him, he was involved in large-scale police corruption. He was given a green light to commit armed robberies, to be involved in drugs.
The bloke was effectively bulletproof. He could do what he wanted in this town. Anything.
Smith has repeatedly and very publicly said he was provided with police assistance to the point of being dropped off and picked up from armed robberies in marked cars and being provided with police equipment and uniforms to conduct armed robberies. So, a fairly significant relationship.
And one that Harvey Jones admired.
Harvey Jones idolised Neddy Smith and just wanted to be as infamous as what he was.
Harvey Jones is a very small-time player on this scene. He earned his living managing a brothel at Homebush. He was a used car salesman at another point. A loudmouth, tall, gangly fellow who nonetheless seemed to throw his weight around in pubs, had propensities to wearing loud, fake jewellery. Thought he was hanging around with the man of the moment and would be seen to be a serious gangster if he's able to go out drinking with Neddy Smith and Ned would give him the time of day. But he doesn't seem to have really added much to Smith's business or to caused him anything other than trouble.
Harvey had been charged with some thefts of some gold bullion. There was a court case pending.
And he had been assembling the money, he said, to bribe police to have those charges fixed.
And according to Neddy Smith in one of his autobiographies, finding the money wasn't going to be difficult for Harvey, and Neddy would help him with the exchange. But only 24 hours before the deal was to be done, Harvey was making himself unpopular.
He was involved in an incident at Sheila's nightclub at North Sydney. He had a habit of going to nightclubs, pulling out his revolver, letting one go on the roof to the horror of the patrons. That caused police inquiries and it brought some unwanted attention to him and also to the people he was actually hanging around with.
The next night, July 15th, 1983, Harvey Jones was to make the $60,000 payment in return for his charges being dropped.
He told his mother that he was going to see Neddy Smith that night for a meeting, according to her, and that was the last time that she had seen him.
But in his book, Neddy claims Harvey never turned up. And after waiting for hours, he called Mrs. Jones, wondering where her son was.
Smith was recorded a few days later saying that he'd contacted Harvey's mother and was concerned about his welfare.
Nobody had seen him nor heard of him or heard what happened to him. It was just one of those sort of dead-end investigations.
But other than people who knew him directly and noticed his absence, Harvey Jones disappearing off the face of the planet wasn't going to cause a great deal of public concern.
But over the next few years, disappearances and underworld murders would literally be in the public arena.
Sydney police are hunting the underworld assassins of 49-year-old Barry Croft.
The shooting happened just before 7 o'clock in the midst of late-night shoppers.
There's many areas he could have been taken, but the underworld like to do it in the open streets.
Barry McCann's bullet-riddled body was discovered at 6:30 this morning by a council cleaner. This was a professional hit. Police have found more than 20 spent cartridges.
The body of Sally Ann Huxtep was fished out of a pond at Centennial Park today.
Michael Daniel Chubb had just returned from buying fish and chips for lunch when the killer struck.
By the time that the shooting had stopped, there were perhaps a dozen fairly well-known crooks dead during this period. No one was charged for any of their murders. Neddy Smith, his name had been connected to some of these, but certainly other people's names had been connected to them as well. They were on the books as unsolved murders.
In 1994, Task Force Snowy was on the scene. In their hands, they had secretly taped confessions about these murders. One of them was about Harvey Jones, and the voice on the tape was of the man he idolised, Neddy Smith.
The underworld figure, Arthur Neddy Smith, has been sentenced to life for the murder of a stranger. A Supreme Court judge rejected Smith's claim that he'd been too drunk to know what he was doing.
For a fellow who was perhaps this city's most notorious criminal ever, he has come unstuck through road rage.
Neddy Smith was found to have stabbed Ronald Flavelle in the stomach on Coogee Bay Road. The dispute broke out when a tow truck driver flicked his lights at a car Smith was travelling in. Today, Justice McInerney sentenced Smith to life in jail, adding to the 13-year sentence he's already serving for armed robbery.
The crunch finally came and he went to jail for life. But he was still eligible to apply for parole. That wouldn't have meant that he was going to get it, but he's still able to apply, and of course anything could happen.
Neddy spent nearly 3 years alone in his cell here at Long Bay Prison. And during that time, he wrote a book, Neddy, The Life and Crimes of Neddy Smith, which became a bestseller. But as he started to pen his next, a book about the unsolved murders of the 80s, he had company.
There was a little bit of overcrowding, and by chance, another prisoner was placed in the same cell.
They asked if I'd like to go in with someone I might have heard of through the media or who I might know through the prison system. And I asked them who it was, but they wouldn't tell me. So they led me up to the cell blocks and locked me in the cell up there, and then Neddy Smith walked in. He was pretty impressive, pretty large sort of a bloke, physically. He knows how to take up a room. But he had these eyes that just bored straight through you, like real cold, icy blue. Yeah, he's a one-off, that's for sure.
Police would know this prisoner as Mr. Brown.
Mr. Brown has spent most of his adult life in prison for thieving, assaults, drug abuse, alcohol abuse. Just one of those institutionalised persons who survives in the jail environment.
Well, there was only 2 of us in the unit, so you had to talk to someone, so we ended up talking to each other and struck up a pretty good rapport with each other. And he was writing a book at the time, and he began telling me about some of the things he did that he could put into the book and some of the things he did that he couldn't put into the book. And some of those was about various murders, so yeah. They're pretty brutal, pretty frank. Like, I've been in jail at that stage probably 20 years, and they scared me because I knew that they were true. That was probably more like you hear a lot of stories in jail and you just put it down to bullshit, but with this bloke, he just knew.
Neddy started bragging to him about murders that he'd committed, and the informant was quite sickened by the way that Neddy would cold-bloodedly told him about these murders.
He told me about a certain murder that he did, and it gave me nightmares. And that's when I thought, well, you know, maybe this is a bit more than just being a crewman in a jail. Maybe I should do something about it. So I contacted the police, and the operation began.
With the cooperation of Mr. Brown, we were able to capture a lot of these conversations about all these unsolved murders going back many years on an authorised listening device tape.
I lay awake many nights thinking about it and thinking about the consequences and whether I'd be able to do it or not. And I couldn't find a reason not to.
I think in total there was mention of 14 separate murders. Some of them were gangland related, some of them were drug rip-offs, and some of them were revenge killings.
One of them was the murder of Harvey Jones.
Yeah, I know a little bit, yeah. I sort of still think I didn't even know how it
Mr. Brown ran a very high risk. One word out of place, Neddy was not stupid completely. If he just said the wrong thing, well, he would have been in fairly grim straits.
I was thinking, shit, I hope he doesn't hear the tape recorder. That's about all I was thinking. Yeah.
But he persevered, and he teased a lot of detail, a lot of information from Neddy.
My goodness, I died. I said, you'll get the fuck up, mate. Louis Harvey was a big 3x7. What did you kill him for? What do you have to go for? What do I know? For you're going to write a book, you can't. No, I'm just interested, that's all.
In a lot of ways, it seemed to me that the only reason that he killed Harvey was because Harvey annoyed him. I'd never met Harvey, but from what I did find out about him, it seemed that he was a bit of a party boy. He went over the top a few times, but he certainly didn't deserve to pay for it with his life for no more than upsetting the bloke. But that's how things were back then.
To use his words, he elsewhere in the book indicates that most big-time criminals come undone because of their mouth, and they tell too many people too many things. And here is he falling for the same trap. The tapes themselves would have allowed us to go out and charge Neddy forthwith, but that would have been quite foolish to do it, because any brief that hinges on a confession per se, well, wouldn't get past first base, and you'd just be wasting your time. It'd be nothing worse than charging Neddy than watching him walk.
What they needed was a body, and for months they searched the area mentioned by Neddy on the tapes.
I've flown over, I've driven over, I've walked through. I knew it better than I really wanted to, but I didn't find Harvey Jones. A man walking his dog found Harvey Jones.
I was watching the news and it said how a bloke had been walking his dog along the beach at Botany and found human remains. And it was pretty much where Neddy had said it was on the tape. And I said, I bet that's Harvey Jones.
My first impressions was, well, here's one brief for Ned.
And Neddy had given them a challenge.
So the trouble is, if they find the skeleton, they can check who they are.
Somewhere in those remains hopefully would give us that linkage back to Neddy Smith and confirm what was on the tapes.
He thought he'd got away with it cold. He thought he'd be right, for sure.
Here we had a person who was sticking his thumbs up at society in general and saying, I've got away with this. And that was our challenge, to make sure, well, you just can't do these things and get away with it. And that was our challenge then, to make sure that we put him away and he paid the price for what he's done.
Police had secretly taped Neddy Smith in his jail cell, confessing to the murder of his friend Harvey Jones. And was confident he'd got away with it.
So the trouble is, if they find the skeleton, they can check who they are.
We had no doubts that Harvey Jones had been murdered by Neddy, but the standard of proof in the courts for a charge of murder is extremely high, and it's beyond reasonable doubt, not just that you think it was him. Neddy, unfortunately, had been locked up for some time and didn't appreciate the value of forensics. He had been locked away, he felt that sense of security. A lot of time had elapsed. He would think that there'd be nothing to tie him back into the crime scene or the crime.
The first step in the process was to establish whether the projectiles found at the post-mortem were fired from a .357 revolver, as Neddy had stated.
There was not a lot of evidence presented to us ballistics-wise. Usually when we go to crime scenes, we'll have a body, we'll have fired cartridge cases, we'll have the smoking gun, so to speak. In this case, we had none of that, except the recovery of the 2 bullets, which were heavily corroded and badly damaged as well. If we recover a bullet under normal circumstances and it's in quite good condition, we will weigh the projectile, we'll measure the projectile, the diameter of it with calipers. We'll also look at those individual markings on the bullet, those lands and grooves, and we can do that by looking at it under a microscope, which will give us an indication of what type of firearm could possibly have been used. What we're looking at here is the surface of the bullet, the side view, and we're actually looking at one of the landmarks on the bullet to make an identification. The problem in this case was that we could only identify one partial landmark on each of the bullets. However, even though the examination was limited, we went to our reference material, did some firing of some weapons out of our library and found the 2 bullets both consistent with being fired from a .38 caliber .357 revolver.
It was encouraging evidence, but the task force would need further proof. Neddy had claimed he had used the .357 and blew out Harvey's heart.
Blew his heart with a big .357.
The x-rays were very helpful and showed a number of fractures in ribs of the chest cavity, undoubtedly fractured by a gunshot. There were shards of projectile around the fracture line, indicating that a projectile had entered the chest, probably from the front, in all likelihood striking the heart and/or lungs.
But even that wasn't enough for this team of detectives led by John Laycock. For them, it was a matter of crossing all T's and dotting all I's.
I don't like just to put the bales on the top of the stumps. I like to belt the stumps right in so as there's no room for any movement. We're playing A grade here. This is a first-class crook, if I can use those terms, and it was going to be a fight to the end. So we didn't want to leave anything open to any suggestion that it wasn't so.
It could be easily seen as a get square. They had to overcome that, and therefore everything they did had to be very much above board.
We were on the right track. We just had to keep on going to really tighten the noose around his neck and give him no room to move. If you raced out, you'd muck it up, and you'd never forgive yourself if you walked.
To further support our theory, we sent one of Harvey's ribs down to an expert in Melbourne. What we needed to know was there any traces of lead on these ribs?
I was basically asked by New South Wales Police to have a look at some bones. There was some visible damage to one of the rib bones, and they wanted to know if this damage was caused due to a gunshot or some other form of damage that could have occurred while the body was buried in the sand. The damage was cone-shaped, which is very typical of bullet damage. But then there was obviously a matter of actually proving it, not just giving an opinion.
To do that, the bone was put into a scanning electron microscope so that any particles on the rib could be detected and analysed. Various heavy metals show up as various images.
Material that has a high atomic number basically shows up as a bright particle. So things like iron and lead, you get quite bright images.
And lead has its own unique shape and form.
A pattern is produced, and that pattern corresponds to lead. In this case, both lead and calcium was detected. The calcium comes from the bones. So the material that was actually on the bones was in fact lead. The finding of lead on the bone and around the damage confirms that a lead projectile, a bullet, caused that damage.
Even more damning evidence was found from the clothes Harvey was wearing on the night he was murdered.
When I started examining the cardigan and the shirt, I had to distinguish between decay and forensic evidence. I located what I believe to be a projectile hole on the cardigan, midway up on the nylon section of the zipper. Now, the remainder of the zipper was totally intact bar this one area.
Harvey's shirt also had a distinctive hole.
We were able to determine that the fabric had been doubled over when the projectile had been fired. When you overlay the two pieces of fabric, it becomes a perfectly circular hole. The holes were measured for diameter. Both the holes in the right chest area were consistent with being either a .38 calibre projectile or a .357 calibre projectile. The most crucial piece of forensic evidence that was obtained from the clothing was the fact that the holes in the jumper in the front right chest area matched the holes in the shirt in the right chest area, and we were clearly able to establish a bullet trajectory from entering the cardigan, through the shirt, and actually striking a rib in Harvey's chest.
We were on a winner. We're on a conviction. We knew it.
The forensic case linking Neddy Smith to the murder of Harvey Jones was strong. Not only had the experts proven the skeleton in the sandhills was Harvey, but they were able to prove that he had been shot, and the weapon was most likely a .357 revolver. When those bullets exited the gun, they made a perfect and traceable trajectory through his cardigan and shirt, hitting a rib in his chest.
Police now had the forensic evidence they needed to match the words used by Neddy in their secretly taped recordings. Also in the confession was the mention of a man who was with Neddy on the night Harvey was killed, a man who police would call Mr. Green.
He'd originally been spoken to by police and was uncooperative. However, when the body was found, it firmed up certain information that we'd been given, and he became cooperative with the police.
Mr. Green was a driver or a gopher for Neddy Smith in those years, and he told us the whole story. On the night of the 15th of July 1983, according to Mr. Green, he went to the Star Hotel at Alexandria where he met Neddy and Harvey Jones. There was some discussion about Mr. Green making some money that night. So they all got into a van and Neddy directed them to drive to the vicinity of Botany. They alighted from the car and Neddy Smith and Harvey Jones went for a walk down to the beach. Mr. Green stayed behind on Neddy's instructions to keep a lookout. A short time later, there was a gunshot and Harvey had been shot by Neddy. He walked down to the beach and he saw Harvey lying on the ground. Neddy was standing over the top of him with a gun in his hand. Mr. Green was then directed by Neddy to dig a hole, which he did. There was a shovel obtained from the van. He dug a fairly deep hole and the body was placed into that hole, and they then left the scene and went back that night to the Star Hotel and just continued on business. Now, that by itself is pretty damning evidence, but it's a man's word and it's open to dispute. You'd probably have to look at possible motives and his background. So it's a question of how much weight you would place on it per se. But put together as a package with the tapes, the crime scene, the forensics, it certainly left no gap that Neddy could punch holes in when it got to court. So it just helped tie everything together.
Colourful Sydney identity Neddy Smith has appeared in court, charged with murdering an underworld figure 15 years ago.
Arthur Neddy Smith under tight security to face trial for the gangland killing of brothel owner Harvey Jones. It's 15 years to the day since he was executed with 2 gunshot wounds to the chest. He was then buried in sand dunes along Botany Bay. Police claim Smith lured Jones to the beach to get $60,000, allegedly to pay off corrupt detective Roger Rogerson for getting Jones off a criminal charge. His body was undiscovered for 13 years. Prosecutors say Smith confessed to the crime. He was secretly recorded boasting about how he got away with it.
The Defence Counsel consented to those tapes being admitted into evidence without contest. So the only defence that Neddy would have was say I was boasting or telling lies or what have you.
His explanation, in his words, were, I'm talking crap.
It's pretty accurate crap for someone that's talking crap.
He was saying that he was testing Mr. Brown, seeing if he told him this story, he heard it back on the prison grapevine. And he says that did in fact happen.
There's been a day of courtroom drama as alleged hitman Neddy Smith came face to face with a cellmate who informed on him.
Looking back now, I think it was probably one of the hardest things I've ever done, but at the time it seemed very, very simple, very easy. I got nervous, before court, just like anyone else, I suppose, and like talking in public and that. But and probably because I was telling the truth in the court, so it didn't really matter that much. I just had to go and tell the truth, so I didn't have to worry about keeping stories together or anything like that.
The trial, that included evidence from Mr. Brown and all the forensic experts, lasted 2 months.
Even with all the evidence and with our confidence, you can never estimate what a jury would or would not do. The jury was out for about 3 or 4 days, which was a very torturous process.
Was there something we'd missed? Was there going to be a legal technicality to be thrown up by the jury, and either a hung jury, which would involve a retrial, or, God forbid, to be acquitted.
Sydney's most notorious gangster will spend the rest of his life in prison. Arthur Neddy Smith was found guilty of murder.
He was first jailed for theft at the age of 15. Now he's convicted of killing brothel owner Harvey Jones. Just as Carolyn Simpson said, Smith showed no remorse or contrition. She said the murder was premeditated, cold-blooded and deliberate. Jones had become a nuisance to him.
It also proves that our legal system does work, even on a 15-year-old murder. And more importantly, I suppose, for Harvey Jones, even though he was a scandal, his 80-year-old mum will now have some peace in the final years.
Already serving a life sentence for killing a tow truck driver, Smith was eligible for parole within weeks. The Jones verdict finishes that.
Neddy was charged with a total of 7 murders arising from those prison tapes. 4 were dismissed at committal. He was acquitted by a jury for another, and when police won this case, they decided not to proceed with the 7th.
There's one conviction, and then we called it quits after that because it was the end result was life meaning life. He would never walk out of jail vertically.
The way and the manner in which the body was found, the place it was found, the bullet wounds that were found on the body, everything supported what Neddy had confessed, and we could prove everything that he had said.
And to have a jury satisfied beyond a reasonable doubt that Neddy had murdered Harvey was just one of the best feelings you get as an investigator. It's not up to police to convict a person. We just put the evidence before the jury, and in this case we'd satisfied the jury that Neddy had killed Harvey.
There were high fives all around and congratulations, and went and had a couple of beers afterwards. It's a good feeling.
We'd taken on one of the best in his day from the other side, and we'd won.
For John Laycock, his fight and search continues.
I'd suggest there's at least one set of remains at Port Botany from the 80s with the gang wars, and I wouldn't be surprised if there were several more. We haven't given up yet.
This quiet suburban street was about to become a crime scene. Inside one house, 3 of its residents had been murdered. On the surface, it was a robbery gone wrong. But the evidence would tell a different story.
Whoever had taken that piece of carpet wanted it removed because it may have something that would identify the person that had committed these crimes.
It was quite likely that something had been placed over her head at the time that she was attacked.
At the initial stages, everyone is a suspect.
All of the facts and circumstances ultimately pointed in one direction and one direction alone.
One of the telephone calls said there'd be 3 members of your family dead.
There was 1 weapon used, 1 assailant. It was quite a sustained attack and also very, very violent.
The person responsible for these killings had left his calling card.
The triple murder of Jennifer, Sarah and Adrian de Gruchy would baffle police with its apparent lack of motive. But finding the killer was possible. The father of forensics, Edmund Lockhart, wrote in 1910 that every contact leaves a trace. And in solving this crime, those words were never so true.
Matthew come from over the road and he looked in a distressed state, you know, sort of in a bad way, and as he got close he said there's something wrong with Mum and Sarah.
Something wrong with Mum and Sarah.
Sarah being an epileptic, I thought Jenny was having a bit of problem giving her the medicine. She just wanted someone to help her. I went to the front door, I seen Jenny's door just slightly ajar, so I thought I'd go up there and see if she's in her bedroom. I walked to the door, called out to Jenny. Had no reply, so I pushed the door open. The bedroom was dark. I seen a lump on the bed and don't know, I just thought she was just going to jump up and go boom or something like that. So I walked over beside the bed, grabbed hold of the blanket and pulled it back, and that's when I found Jenny. I just couldn't wait to get out of there. That's when I called out to my father-in-law and told him to ring the police and ambulance.
We were met by a young male that had walked out of the house. He was crying. He was saying things like, "What's happened? Who's done this?"
18-year-old Matthew de Gruchy was totally distraught and was immediately taken to hospital. Inside the house, members of his family were dead.
When I first got there, it was around 9 o'clock or thereabouts, and went into the house. I had a look at the first bedroom, which is the master bedroom, and I saw a deceased adult female. I then moved down a hallway towards the second bedroom, where I saw a deceased teenage female. We then searched the remainder of the house, and we entered through a door into the garage, and that's where we found the deceased form of Adrian. The injuries were horrific. They were quite distressing, actually, to view. Not something that you'd want anyone really to have to see.
When I arrived at the crime scene, the police showed me the bodies of 3 deceased people. I think with Jennifer de Gruchy, she was lying in bed with the blankets and sheets partially up over her. There was a set of glasses on a bedside table nearby that to me looked as if she'd hopped into bed and had her reading glasses on and maybe had turned the light off, put her glasses beside her and had gone off to sleep, and perhaps after that time was attacked.
There was not a large amount of blood spatter in the room, which was basically inconsistent with the degree of the trauma which had been inflicted on the victim. It was quite likely that something had been placed over her head at the time that she was attacked. However, we did see some very small blood staining on the wall and on the bedhead behind the deceased, which did appear to us to be unusual in its shape and its location.
I examined Sarah and found that she was lying on her bed with a set of Walkmans nearby and was listening to maybe some music or something like that. So it made me feel, if Sarah didn't hear anything, and presumably she didn't, maybe she was then attacked.
Again, with Sarah's room, there were similar circumstances in relation to the amount of blood staining which was evident. There was, in our opinion, relatively small amounts of blood staining, and again it appeared likely that something had been placed over her head at the time of the attack.
Adjacent to Sarah's body was a blood-stained pillow, which seemed to have come from another part of the house. It didn't look like one of the pillows that she'd slept on. I wondered whether that pillow had been used to maybe partially smother her, or it might have been a combination of the person or persons involved tried to smother her and at the same time were bludgeoning her about the head.
Having examined the injuries to Jennifer and Sarah, Dr. Carla found evidence that 15-year-old Adrian was also a victim of a surprise attack.
It looked to me like Adrian was working in the garage and might have been doing some repair work on a chair. There was some woodwork glue around and the chair was upturned. I thought, though, that not only that, but looking at Adrian's injuries, particularly at the back of his head, seemed to suggest to me that perhaps the attacker came in and launched a blitz-type attack or a very rapid attack on Adrian's head at the back. There was also blood on the ceiling of the garage, and it had to me the characteristics of what's called cast-off blood. In other words, it's blood that's on a already bloodied weapon that's been used in an attack on somebody. And when that weapon is brought back or raised upwards in a rapid way, any blood that's on that weapon is literally cast off that weapon and strikes things like the ceiling or the wall or any other objects that happened to be nearby.
It gives us an indication of where the assailant had actually been standing and also in what position the victim had been at the time of being struck.
Who had so violently attacked and murdered this family? And what was the murder weapon that had been used? The victims themselves would hold the answers.
Police are mystified by the horrific murder of a mother and her 2 teenage children battered to death in their Wollongong home. Their bodies were discovered this morning by another son who was away for the night. The woman's husband, who works in Sydney, is returning to the house tonight.
The woman's 19-year-old son collapsed in shock after discovering Jenny de Gruchy's battered body in the main bedroom of the house when he arrived home around 9 this morning. In a second bedroom, he found his 13-year-old sister Sarah also dead. Her 15-year-old brother Adrian was later discovered in the garage. Forensic experts searched the house for clues this morning.
There were a couple of unusual aspects of the scene. In Jennifer's bedroom, which was the main bedroom of the premises, there was a relatively large area of carpet which had been cut from the floor, which in itself was unusual because the house was only relatively new. There were also a couple of smaller pieces which had been cut, one from near the base of the bed and another near the doorway. These, of course, pose questions to the investigator of why has the carpet been cut.
Whoever had taken that piece of carpet wanted it removed because it may have indicated to us, after testing, something that would identify him. Maybe the assailant had spilt some blood, and for that reason that person had to remove that carpet.
And in the hallway, there was further evidence of the killer possibly covering his tracks.
The hallway was subjected to a very detailed examination. We used an instrument known as a polylight, which is an artificial light source we often use. It aids us in detecting small amounts of trace evidence. It had been noted that there was a reddish-coloured stain in a couple of locations in the hallway, but they looked as though they might have been slightly diluted. It may well have been that this blood was in fact that of the offender, and he may well have made an attempt to clean up that blood from the floor, knowing full well that it was his own blood. We conducted presumptive testing for the presence of blood on the stains that we observed in the hallway, and they proved positive. So from that, a number of swabs were taken and sent away for further analysis.
In fact, 60-odd swabs were taken at the house, which included the tiny and unusual shaped blood spots from the wall behind Jennifer's bed.
Police haven't ruled out robbery as a motive after discovering a video recorder missing from the home.
The appearance of possible robbery at the house was isolated just to a couple of rooms. There was no evidence of major ransacking of the premises at all. The types of items that were stolen were things like kids' calculators and Sony games, this type of item. We did locate a cabinet from which it appeared that there was likely a video recorder missing, whereas more valuable items were left untouched. The circumstance was as such that there may have been a bungled burglary which led to the victims being attacked, or one possible scenario is that there's been an attempt made to hide the crime.
Police suspected this was a staged break and enter, and the post-mortem examination pointed to it being done by one offender.
I felt that in this particular case of all 3 de Gruchy deaths that there was a distinct possibility that there was one weapon used, one assailant. It was a very rapid attack on all 3 people, that it was quite a sustained attack on each one, and also very, very violent. The pattern of injuries was very similar in all 3 cases. Sarah had injuries which were very similar to Adrian's head injuries, about her forehead and the top of her skull. But she also had some injuries on her arms, particularly her right arm, that looked to me as if she'd put up a bit of a struggle. I think it reasonable to think that she raised her arm in some way because there was a distinctive line of bruising on the inner aspect of her right forearm that had a very distinctive appearance. It had a squared off end and a linear strip of bruising that I think was caused by a shaft-like or a cylindrical object.
The injury which we noted On the arm of Sarah, we also noticed similar linear type injuries on the body of Adrian.
There were a number of quite distinctive bruises on the front of the chest that were about 15 centimetres or so in length. But on top of that, in the upper chest region, just below the collarbone, was a very distinctive circular shaped bruise. And I had to ask myself, and I asked the police, what might have caused not only the injuries which were quite linear on the front of the chest, but which also might have caused the circular shaped bruise on the upper part of the chest. So after a bit of discussion, we wondered whether it was something like a tyre lever or a car jack, a wheel brace, something like that, which, if used in various ways, could have produced these injuries.
The police were desperate to find that murder weapon, but it was what they didn't find that would lead the forensic team down an unexpected path.
The thought then goes to, where would a wheel brace normally be? The next conclusion is it would be in a motor vehicle, and there was only one motor vehicle there. Jennifer de Gruchy's car, which was inside the crime scene area.
On opening the boot, it was noted that the hatch, which normally contains the vehicle jack and wheel brace, was slightly ajar, which indicated that, in all likelihood, at some stage or other, someone had accessed this small compartment. On opening the hatch, the car jack was in position. However, the actual wheel brace and the car jack handle were missing. So it was unusual. We searched the rear of the vehicle for the wheel brace, but it wasn't located. On examining the spare wheel, it still had the flash. There was a small beading around the tyre surface, which was indicative that this particular wheel had never been on the road.
So there'd been never any need for those items to be used, and therefore there was never any need for them to be removed from where they'd been put in when the car had been manufactured.
The police confirmed that when Jennifer bought the car, the wheel brace was there.
Subsequently, we were able to be supplied with a similar type of wheel brace which would normally be with the vehicle. It was very similar indeed to the type of injuries which were inflicted on the deceased.
The injuries on the deceased bodies of Sarah and Adrian de Gruchy told a story of a brutal and vicious attack. It also gave clues to the murder weapon, a wheel brace that police were desperate to find.
Police have appealed for help in their hunt for the killer of a family of 3 battered to death in a frenzied attack. Detectives were back at the Albion Park home today with scanning equipment to search for clues and the murder weapon. A post-mortem has revealed 40-year-old Jennifer de Gruchy and her teenage children, Sarah and Adrian, were bludgeoned to death with a heavy metal object.
And what I'm now asking is for assistance from the public to report anything of a suspicious nature that they observed or saw or heard of.
The SES and Fire Brigade and police conduct a search of the backwater of Lake Illawarra, which backed up to the house where the Gruchys lived, just to see if anything had been tossed. We didn't find anything.
Meanwhile, Jennifer's car that had its wheel brace missing had become an exhibit and was taken to the police compound to be forensically examined.
As a result of that examination, we were able to elicit another piece of evidence that assisted us with our inquiries.
A small, what appeared to be a carpet fibre, a little over a centimetre or so in length, was located on the floor of the vehicle behind the driver's seat. The significance of the carpet was that it appeared to be a very similar colour to the missing carpet from the main bedroom of the premises. It certainly didn't appear to be similar to any other carpet which was actually, for example, which was fitted to the car itself. A sample of carpet was taken from the main bedroom of the premises, and it was sent away for comparison examination with the carpet fibre recovered from the vehicle to see if they'd come from the same origin. The results of the examination or the comparison of the carpet indicated that it was highly probable that they had originated from the same source.
Detectives tonight are again interviewing Mrs de Gruchy's husband and 19-year-old son, hoping they can provide new clues to the killings.
At any inquiry, at the initial stages, everyone is a suspect. And as is the case in this inquiry, in the initial stages, Wayne de Gruchy was a suspect. He was interviewed, about his movements the previous evening. To use the terminology that most people are aware of, he had alibis.
Wayne's alibi was that he was in Sydney, an hour and a half's drive from his home, playing golf that day and staying the night at his parents' place.
We were able to speak to those people and they confirmed his whereabouts.
However, other witnesses told another story.
There was information supplied to us that particular people had seen a Commodore which was consistent with the car that was normally used by Wayne Gruchy, and further that they saw a person in that car that was not inconsistent with the description of Wayne in the early hours of the morning. The only problem with that was that the car that was normally used by Wayne had been involved in a motor vehicle collision some days prior and was actually in the smash repairs, which we were able to confirm. That showed that what they were telling us wasn't right. Further to that, the times of death decided by the pathologist weren't consistent with the possibility that Wayne could have travelled down after retiring in Sydney and committing the crimes and then returning.
I felt that the time of death was between approximately 8 p.m. on the 12th of March up to about 1 a.m. on the 13th of March 1996. And my reasons for those times are that based on the examination of the bodies at the scene, the temperature of the bodies, when comparing it with the ambient temperature in the garage and in the house, as well as the stiffening of the bodies and the gravitational settling of the blood, all three things in conjunction made me think that this was an approximate time for when these people might have met their deaths.
As police continued their search for the murder weapon, the missing piece of carpet, and the stolen items from the house, other important evidence was uncovered.
Not far from the body of Adrian was a red-coloured jerry can. The unusual thing was that the lid on the jerry can was actually in the open position, and examination revealed that there was a quantity of petrol within the jerry can. But it wasn't until we'd moved the body that it became evident that there was petrol on the deceased.
On Adrian's left side, there was some skin peeling, which I noticed, possibly suggestive that there might have been an attempt to partially douse Adrian in petrol and set him alight, and thereby setting the whole crime scene alight as well.
The fact that the deceased had petrol on his body and on his clothes, examination of the jerry can was very important, obviously.
The jerry can, along with other physical and biological evidence found at the scene, was now in laboratories being astutely examined. In one of those tubes, the DNA of the killer would be found. 3 members of the Gruchy family had been murdered between 8 p.m. on the 12th of March 1996 and 1 a.m. on the following morning. Detectives believed the robbery was staged and the killings had been intentional. As yet, no murder weapon, the stolen items, nor the cut-out piece of carpet from Jennifer's bedroom had been found. But the jerry can that had been used to douse one of the victims was yielding results.
The usual procedure in any examination is to use just oblique lighting, a visual examination. We use a polylight to assist us with this. The fingerprints that appeared on the handle and the side of the handle of the petrol can were very good impressions. They didn't require further enhancement. They were photographed and used for comparison purposes.
To photograph the prints found on the underside of the handle, a mirror was placed underneath to capture the ridges that would be identical to one and one only person who had handled that can.
They then compared the fingerprints and identified the left, middle and ring fingers to be identical with the inked impressions of Matthew Gruchy.
However, Matthew had used the jerry can often. The family cars were filled with petrol from this can, and Matthew was the one who did it. But what of the blood potentially recognised as being that of the killer? The diluted blood in the hallway and the small spots behind Jennifer's bed that were out of place with the other blood spatter evidence.
Detectives are waiting for the results of blood tests on a young man who said he found his family murdered in their home near Wollongong. Matthew de Gruchy and his father Wayne underwent the tests at a local hospital as they continue to help police investigate the triple murder.
The advantage of DNA is in the ability to discriminate quite easily between different individuals. Here we have a family, and I was able to easily distinguish through simple DNA testing the different people in the family, even though we were talking about a related group of individuals.
Dr. Gertz had received dozens of swabs from the house and needed to distinguish whose blood was whose, and whose was potentially the killer's.
Most of the blood matched that of the deceased, but the blood staining that was on the back of Jennifer's bed and the blood staining down the hallway had DNA that matched that of Matthew de Gruchy and not any other member of his family.
But how did Matthew's blood get there? His girlfriend Alyssa told police she had seen no injuries on him on the night of the murders.
Because Matthew had said he'd gone to his girlfriend's place, we then, as part of the investigation, obviously we spoke to his girlfriend. We were able to piece together a bit of a timeline.
Hey, Alyssa.
The police knew the couple had spoken with each other at 8 p.m.
He'd made an arrangement with her to attend there that evening, and he hadn't arrived, and so she made a phone call back to the Gruchy household to speak to Matthew, and that was around 10 o'clock. That phone call went unanswered, so after that she went to bed. She wasn't aware if Matt was still coming up or not.
Although Matthew had said to his girlfriend that he would be there soon, he didn't arrive until 11 p.m. Some 3 hours after speaking with her.
He went into the house and he just told her that the reason he'd been delayed is because his mother had asked him to stay back because they'd received some crank phone calls. He'd said that one of the persons that had sent the crank call said to him, there'll be 3 members of your family dead.
Matthew had never told police at any time that his family had been threatened on the night they were murdered. So to confirm Alyssa's statement, investigators would need to check the telephone records of the de Gruchy household to uncover the truth.
We were able to establish telephone calls that had been made because we were able to go back and speak to people that made those calls. However, the telephone calls that Matthew mentioned to his girlfriend about people ringing and making the threats, we weren't able to establish if that had actually taken place. If that had happened, do you think it was one of the first things that would have been said to us?
Well, this is an electronic recorded interview between Detective Sergeant DJ Sharkey and Matthew Wayne de Gruchy. When the call's made, I'll just try and clarify myself. The phone rings, you pick the phone off out of the cradle. How long a time after picking the phone up does the line stay open?
When you just hear the beeps.
So, are you saying that they hang up as soon as you pick the phone up? Is that what happens?
Well, as soon as you pick the phone up to put it to your ear, you just hear the beeps.
We were trying to establish whether the calls had connected. We were asking him, had he taken the call? We were asking questions along the lines of, did you hear anything? Was there beeping to show that the call had connected?
So you're saying that they become aware as soon as it's a connection, and then they hang up, is that right?
Well, I guess so, yes.
If that story had been true, Matthew would have had to have heard someone say that to him, and there would have had to been a connection on the telephone line, and there wasn't.
Had Matthew killed his mother, brother and sister? And if so, what was the possible motive?
Has there ever been an occasion in the past where you've had an argument with your mother over the use of the car?
Matthew de Gruchy's fingerprints and blood had been found at the crime scene. He told police that he had stayed at his girlfriend's on the night of the murders, arriving there late because of crank calls that had come into the de Gruchy house. But when police checked, there was no record of them. Police were continuing to interview their prime suspect, this time about the discovery of the bodies.
Now, in the statement you made last Wednesday, the 13th, you spoke to the detective and he recorded in the statement about when you arrived home. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
Well, can you just go over that again for me, please?
I arrived home at about 8:30, 8:35.
Hello? Matthew told the police he returned home that morning to grab his wallet that he'd forgotten he'd left there, and then headed straight down to the local shops.
In the statement you say that you left the house and then went to get some cigarettes. Is that correct? Well, it doesn't record a nod. You're going to have to say yes or no.
Yes.
And then you returned to the house. Is that correct?
Yes, after the shop.
And that's what it says in your statement that you made that day, that you came back to the house from the shop after purchasing the cigarettes.
Yeah.
Well, what did you do then?
Opened the front door, walked inside, went to the kitchen, realised it was quiet. Went back down the hallway, sort of hit Sarah's door. Just didn't really worry about it, and then opened my mum's door.
What did you do then?
Realised about me mum.
Did you... What happened then?
Well, I didn't know what had happened, so it was, breakdown and all that. Ran outside, and then just to find help, and then I saw Steve across the road.
There's something wrong with Mum and Sarah.
In the statement obtained from Steve Bailey, he says that Matthew came out and said there's something up with Mum and Sarah.
There's something wrong with Mum and Sarah.
When interviewing Matthew, we spoke to him about what he did when he entered the house, and we specifically put it to him, did you go to your sister's bedroom?
Did you go to the lounge room at that time at all?
No.
Now, on that occasion, did you go to the dining room?
No.
Did you go to the kitchen?
No.
Did you go to your sister's bedroom?
When put to him, did he go into Sarah's bedroom? He said he didn't. If he hadn't have gone in there, how did he know that something happened to Sarah?
Now, you drove to Alyssa's place, that's correct?
Yeah.
And you arrived there sometime around 11, is that correct?
Yeah.
And that's what you said in your previous statement?
Yeah.
Whereabouts did you... and you drove your mother's car, is that correct?
Yeah.
Matthew had used the family car on occasions and put a lot of kilometres on it, so we've been told. And as such, the family had decided that he could use his father's car, his father's work vehicle. Normally, Matthew's father would have been home on that evening, but that day he'd been staying in Sydney, and as such, Matthew couldn't use his father's car. So he had to use his mother's vehicle to travel.
Matthew was therefore the last person who had access to the car on the night of the murders.
Has there ever been an occasion in the past where you've had an argument with your mother over the use of the car?
I wouldn't call it an argument.
I asked Matthew in an interview if there'd ever been any arguments over his use of his mother's vehicle, and he said, well, I wouldn't call them arguments, but we'd had received information that there had been some dispute between Matthew and his mother over the use of the car.
Has there ever been an occasion when your mother has declined your use of the car and you have threatened her with any physical force?
No.
Has there ever been an occasion where you've assaulted your mother?
No.
So Matthew was given the opportunity to confess to his involvement.
That concludes the interview.
He didn't take that opportunity.
Oh, no.
We allowed him to leave the police station. Then we went about our work to gather the evidence to show that he was the person who committed those crimes.
Without any witnesses, the detectives and forensic investigators would need to put together a whole jigsaw of circumstantial evidence. They already had Matthew's fingerprints on the jerry can, and they had found his blood in the house. And Matthew had been the last person to use his mother's car.
I received a carpet fibre that was found in the back of Jennifer de Gruchy's car. The fibre was about 3 centimetres long, and what was interesting about it was right at the end of it was a small red-brown stain. Because it was so small, there wasn't a lot of testing we could do with it, so what we did was we cut a small amount of that staining off and put it into a tube to pursue it with DNA testing. The tests on the carpet fibre found that the DNA could not have come from anybody in the family but Matthew de Gruchy.
That fibre had matched the carpet fibres in Jennifer's room, and police speculated how Matthew's blood came to be there.
He possibly could have bled as a result of a nosebleed through pressure. We've made inquiries, and that is a possibility that some people can bleed through the nose just as a result of the pressure that they're under. We really couldn't say how it got there. Suffice to say that it was Matthew's blood.
9 days after the murders, Matthew was attending the funeral of his mother, sister, and brother. It would take another 2 months before police would get the vital breakthrough and the last piece of the jigsaw they needed to complete their case. It had now been 2 months since Jennifer, Sarah and Adrian had been bludgeoned to death. Matthew de Gruchy, the prime suspect for their murders, was now spending time between the family home and that of his girlfriend. The police were still gathering their evidence, and lucky for them, a group of teenagers had an inquisitive nature.
I was about 16 at the time. A couple of mates lived right near this old quarry. It had a big dam in there, and this one particular day we were deciding to make a jump that went into the dam. We climbed up a bit higher onto this big ledge so we could actually see if we'd see how deep the water was, noticing something red in the water.
I'm not going in there. Neither am I. You can. Stinks.
That's only water.
My mate walked into the water to grab the bag. He then started walking back towards us as we all met him to grab the bag off him, as we all wanted to know what was in there. And as we opened it, there was a couple of bits of carpet, looked like what was squashed paper, and a hammer, which we actually decided to keep the hammer and threw the bag back in the water as we had no need for it.
The boys had found the bag only days after the murders. So when it came to the attention of the police 2 months later, they immediately drained the dam to find that evidence.
Detectives searched a dam at Woonona. It's alleged they found a number of items, many identified as having come from the de Gruchy household, including a video recorder, compact discs and a lady's purse with a photo licence of Jennifer de Gruchy.
The fact that we'd located the property was a big plus for us, because it certainly indicated to us that we were on the right path.
Earlier on, when Matthew had provided the list of items stolen from the house, it did appear a little bit odd to us that he was able to be so specific. Then when the items were found in the dam, it tended to confirm those suspicions, as the majority of items listed in fact turned up. There was a calculator which had the name A. de Gruchy, which is obviously Adrian's calculator, which was on the list as being stolen. There was also a lady's wallet with paperwork belonging to Jennifer de Gruchy. There's a video recorder and a number of other items, including a number of pieces of carpet which appeared as though they may well have been the carpet pieces that had been cut from the bedroom floor.
So did Matthew have time to kill 3 people, stage a robbery, cut the carpet, wipe the floor, drive to the dam to dispose of incriminating evidence, and then get to his girlfriend's by 11 p.m?
After discovery of the dam and the proximity of the dam to Alyssa's place, I then caused a couple of the members of my team to travel from the home of Matthew to the dam, then to Alyssa's. And what I got them to do was to travel at different speeds so I could see how long it would take just to satisfy ourselves that that was capable and possible to be done, which we did. It was certainly within the time frame.
Apart from the missing items from the house that were found in the dam and bag, another crucial piece of evidence existed.
There was a small plastic resealable bag located with the property, which appeared to contain a number of band-aids and what appeared to be small torn pieces of paper. It was visible on the paper that there was some sort of handwriting.
I think there were 13 pieces of paper in all that needed to be reconstructed. The document had been moist, it had been in water, and that some of the letters had actually bled into the fibres of the paper. When I was able to reconstruct the document, there were a number of words on that document, commencing with open gate, open blinds, mum, Sarah, Adrian, hit self with pole, cut somewhere with knife.
It appeared to us once the note was put together, it was a checklist of things that needed to be done to make it appear that someone else had committed the crimes in the Gruchy household.
After the actual reconstruction of the documents, I was able to then compare the handwriting on that reconstructed document with known samples of Matthew de Gruchy's handwriting. There were about 12 points altogether that were fairly strong, similar features appearing between the two. I was of the opinion that it was probable that Matthew de Gruchy wrote the questioned writing, in that it was more likely than not that he did than he didn't.
We arrested him and charged him with the murder of his mother, brother and sister.
7 Nightly News with Ross Simons.
Good evening. An 18-year-old Wollongong man has been refused bail on charges of killing his mother, brother and sister. Matthew de Gruchy was arrested after a 3-month investigation into the triple murder.
Matthew claims he spent the night at his girlfriend's and only discovered the bodies when he returned home in the morning. Crown Prosecutor Paul Conlon claims DNA evidence links Matthew to the murder scene.
I think the finding of that carpet fibre with blood on it, which ultimately proved to be the blood or consistent with the blood of Matthew de Gruchy, was very significant in this case when we came to look at the fact that pieces of carpet had been cut out of the main bedroom. I commented to the jury that the person responsible for these killings had left his calling card on that carpet. All of the facts and circumstances in that case ultimately pointed in one direction and one direction alone, and that was to the guilt of Matthew de Gruchy.
A man is facing life in jail after being found guilty of murdering his mother, brother and sister. Matthew de Gruchy was just 18. The jury ruled he bashed them to death at the family home and then tried to make it look like a robbery.
I noticed that when the verdict was brought down, there was no reaction from him at all. He maintained a bit of a steely glare down towards his feet, and that was a pose which he'd maintained throughout the course of the trial.
Given that we had no murder weapon and no apparent motive for the crime, the forensic aspects of this case were so powerful that they were able to prove beyond reasonable doubt the involvement of Matthew de Gruchy in the commission of these 3 murders.
2.5 years after the murder of his mother, sister and brother, Matthew de Gruchy was sentenced to a minimum jail term of 21 years and a maximum of 28. His earliest release from prison would be in 2017, when he is 39 years old.
Whether it was because his mother wouldn't lend him the car or or any other reason or disputes previously, I don't know. All I know is that all the evidence we had pointed towards Matthew and didn't point towards anyone else. So the only person that really knows why he did what he did is Matthew.
A handwritten note on a scrappy piece of paper would lead police to a murder site and a 2-year investigation to find the killer. Along the way, another woman would die and 3 families would be torn apart forever.
Why has he done that? How could he have done that?
The more we tried to find out who she was, the less information we were getting.
The ability of a particular piece of evidence to show that one person was responsible is highly specific.
We really didn't have any idea as to who might have been the offender.
I was quite convinced by that time that I needed to contact the police.
I can't really find the words to describe just how bad it makes you feel. It's a dreadful feeling.
The question that we were asking ourselves, was the offender keeping an eye on the police investigation?
All I wanted to know is who killed her and how the killer looks like.
I think that this is going to be a suspicious one.
The first few weeks of April 1999 were a busy time for police in Adelaide. One of the biggest events on the car racing calendar was on, and thousands of people from around Australia flocked to the capital. As crowds began to dwindle, 2 police officers hoped their shift would be a little more routine, but it wasn't to be.
The patrol officers found a note on the windscreen, and this note directed them to the Old Paynham police station, and that they may find the body of a woman there, and that it was no joke. They immediately went down, and in the bushes, they did in fact find the body of a young woman. It looked like the body had been there for some time because it was in an advanced state of decomposition.
Tonight, a body dumped at an old police station but unnoticed for days.
The grisly discovery was made just before 11 last night. The woman's badly decomposed body was partially hidden by bushes in the front yard of the old station. Police say she'd been murdered.
Because of the arrangement of the clothing, her jeans had been pulled down and her panties had also been removed. There was a distinct suggestion that there had been some sexual offence committed prior to her death.
When you go to a scene, basically what the investigating police want to know is the manner of death. And when I looked at that case, it was immediately apparent that it was a homicide they were dealing with. It was a sexual assault homicide from behind. And the reason I say that is the upper clothing that remained on the body included a quilted shirt, and the quilted shirt had been twisted tightly around the neck. And that indicated that the cause of death was strangulation by her own clothing, strangulation by ligature.
Apart from how she died, police needed answers to 2 other important questions. Who the victim was, and could they get any estimate on when she died?
Pathologists are quite good at identifying intervals since death in that first 24 hours. But in this case, the death was obviously a long time before that. The body was heavily infested with various forms of insect activity, so I knew that I couldn't help them. I knew it was important, but I couldn't help them, so I asked them to get an entomologist out of the scene.
Establishing the time of death is critical. And on this particular occasion, there were maggots on the body, which is a rather gruesome part of any murder investigation, but from a scientific and forensic point of view, the maggots can determine pretty much the exact time of death.
When I took the maggots that I'd collected from the murder victim's body back to the laboratory, I went about in the first place identifying the species of flies that they represented to determine how long I thought those maggots had been in the body of the victim based on the likely temperature conditions that the maggots had experienced. The warmer it is, the quicker maggots will develop. So here I relied upon temperatures from the body as well as temperatures from the Bureau of Meteorology.
However,
about the weather conditions in the area during the likely time that the body had been lying there. I estimated that the body had become infested by flies sometime during the morning of the 13th of April.
It meant that the victim had been murdered the night before, on Monday the 12th of April, some 5 days before her body was found.
With regard to who the deceased was, she had no personal effects. We didn't know, other than the fact that she was obviously a young adult female with blonde hair. We didn't know who she was. But when I did the post-mortem, she had 3 missing teeth in the upper jaw and she had a number of gold restorations, and they were sufficiently odd that they would identify the deceased, providing someone reported her missing.
The victim is described as approximately 162 centimetres, 5 foot 4 inches tall. She had shoulder-length fair hair.
There were a number of females reported missing and similar in description, but because of the approximate age and the general description, it narrowed down to a lady who had been reported missing, Maya Jakic.
Apart from her age, height and hair colour, the missing persons report also indicated that the 30-year-old lived nearby to the crime scene. And more importantly, she wore a dental plate to hide 3 missing teeth.
The experts examined the actual dental records and they were able to say that positively it was Maya Jakic.
But Maya had been missing since the 6th of April, 6 days before the entomologist believed she had been murdered. So where had she been?
It was important to try and track her movements. Where had Maya been in the previous week? Who had she been mixing with? Because any of those people might have been suspects, could provide a motive for the murder.
What police were yet to realise was that on the same night she was strangled to death, the murderer had contacted them.
Yeah, there seems to be a body of some sort in the bushes there. I'm not too sure. I haven't gone near it. Where are you ringing from?
When the decomposed body of a young woman was found hidden among bushes, the manner of death was clear. She had been sexually assaulted and then strangled to death with her own clothing. But her identity was only made possible because of 3 missing teeth.
I just cooked my dinner and I was putting the dinner on the table. We watched the news and what I saw was a huge shock to me.
Maya Jakic's body was discovered on Saturday night after a note was left on the windscreen of a patrol car at the Norwood police station.
I just couldn't believe. I almost died of shock because I spoke to her mum just a few days ago. We're looking for her. Her mum was a couple of times a day passing the place where her body was covered with the branches without knowing that her daughter's body was lying on the ground.
According to the forensic entomologist, Maya's body had been lying there for 5 days. Her mother, however, had reported her missing 6 days before that time. So it was vital for the detectives to piece together her last movements.
Shortly after we'd established who the victim was, the investigation went to trying to obtain any information we could about Maya Jakic, her background, who knew her. It was very difficult because the more we tried to find out, the less information we were getting. There were dozens of people who actually knew her, but when it came down to who in fact she was or what they knew about her, they really knew nothing about her. And all the information we were getting was that she was wandering between Glenelg, the city, and her home at all times of the day and night.
Maya was well known to proprietors at the Martin Shopping Centre, where until about a month ago she was seen almost every day. They've spoken of a quiet but polite girl who always kept to herself.
Don't know exactly what she was doing around here, but I think only once in the past 10 months I'd seen her with a friend.
She didn't have many friends. I was like her last resort for everything. She didn't mix much with other people, no. Deep down, I think she was lonely. I think that maybe she had a little depression or something, and she didn't want to talk about that. I used to call her, you know, Maya, talk to me. Oh, she just didn't want to talk. All I wanted to know is who killed her how the killer looks like. How somebody can do such a thing?
So far, the identity of the killer, like Maya's last days, remained a mystery. The note on the police car revealed no fingerprints. Detectives hoped the post-mortem would lead them to a suspect.
The importance of a sexual assault homicide these days is the DNA databank. With DNA technology, the ability of a particular piece of evidence to show that one person and no one else was responsible is highly specific. So our expectations, at least at that stage, were that we might find seminal fluid or hairs or fibres or any other contact trace evidence. But all the smears and swabs that I'd collected at the post-mortem came back negative. No DNA was found. In other words, no seminal fluid was identified.
Now, the reasons for that can be many and varied. Perhaps that there was no sexual contact, although we suspected that was unlikely to be the case. But perhaps the advanced state of decomposition can impact on that. But at the end of the day, we were not able to get any DNA.
The killer, it seemed, was totally without trace. He could be anyone and be anywhere. And at the time of the murder, there was a race in town.
He's going to get a rousing reception. Look at him go up. Craig Lowndes takes out leg one of the Adelaide 500.
The Adelaide 500 Racing Carnival brought people from all over Australia, indeed from all over the world.
It was the gutsy V8 supercar race the crowd had come to see.
Visual programs here. The place is electric.
So this complicated the investigation, given that we really didn't have any idea as to who might have been the offender.
But then a breakthrough. Police learned that a call had come through on their hotline on the night the entomologist believed Maya had been murdered.
Police emergency.
Hello?
Hello?
Yeah, there's someone hanging around the old Paynham police station. Seems to be trying to break in there, I think.
That particular person was very, very important to the investigation because he certainly knew or saw something. And then, lo and behold, a short time later, we had information that came forward in relation to another 000 call where the ambulance was called.
Ambulance service? Yeah, I just walked past the old Paynham police station. There seems to be a body of some sort in the bushes there, I'm not too sure.
That call was also made on the Monday night.
Paynham Road, haven't gone near it. It's up off Paynham Road there.
In both instances, the police and paramedics went to the old police station mentioned by the caller, but there was no break and enter or a body, and the calls were dismissed as hoaxes.
5 days later, the note appeared, and fortunately they didn't go to the old police station, but came here to the old patrol base, where they found Maya's body in the bushes.
I think that we were in little doubt once we'd learned of the 2 000 calls and the note that they were all, or the one person was responsible for all of them. And it was fairly unlikely in our view that that person was an innocent bystander. We suspected that that person was in fact the offender.
Right, we'll get on ahead. What's your name? One side.
Because we can track the 000 calls. The first was made from a phone box quite near to where Maya's body had been located. The other 000 call was made from a phone box near the Royal Adelaide Hospital.
Where are you ringing from? A phone box? In the Adelaide? Yep. In the Royal Adelaide? Yep. So how do you know what's happening out at Paynham there? Well, I've just seen that there's a body there about half an hour ago. All right. You didn't stop to see what was happening there? No. No, all right. We'll get on ahead. What's your name? One side. Just let you know anyway. What's that?
The question that we were asking ourselves, was the offender keeping an eye on the police investigation? Was he waiting and watching for the police?
30-year-old Maya Jarkic had been strangled to death. Her body left in the bushes outside an old police patrol base. The killer had called police twice on the night he murdered her. And then 5 days later, police believed the same person placed a note on their patrol car. But while he left the note, he left no clues to his identity, except his voice.
Yeah, I just walked past the old Paynham police station. There seems to be a body.
We had to try and get that voice on the 000 call out to the public. It's not something that we've done before, release a call from Crime Stoppers, but it was so important on this occasion, we believe that was the correct course.
This is 7 Nightly News with Graham Goodings and Jane Doyle.
Tonight, the tape police hope will help catch a killer. Police are asking you to watch and listen to our first story very carefully. We're going to show you a note sent to police and play an audio tape, either of which may lead to the killer of Maya Jakic, whose body was found at Paynham last month.
Hello?
Hello?
Yeah, there's someone hanging around the old Paynham police station. Seems to be trying to break in there, I think.
The voice of the man police believe holds vital clues in the Maya Jakic murder case. Major crime detectives have taken the extraordinary moves of releasing the tapes and note in a desperate attempt to get public help.
Well, we're certainly hoping that someone perhaps recognises the voice.
Anyone with information is asked to call Bank SA Crime Stoppers on 1800 333 000.
Hundreds of calls came in, but there were no solid leads.
We had hundreds of calls in respect to those two areas. People saying that the caller was someone they went to school with, next door neighbours, a variety of reasons why they thought the voice was someone and the author was someone else. But unfortunately, it got us nowhere.
2 weeks later, they tried again.
With information drying up, detectives have again appealed for a mystery 000 phone caller to make contact with them and tell them what he knows.
Even a reward for $100,000 couldn't do the trick.
Unfortunately, some of these investigations do reach a stage where you've followed absolutely every possible line of inquiry, and each line of inquiry becomes a dead end.
The case remained open but was scaled down. 2 years on from Maya's murder, the team were now occupied with another mystery, the disappearance of 18-year-old Megumi Suzuki.
Megumi had left her residence on Friday, August the 3rd at 7:41 a.m. She headed to school, and the security video showed her leaving at 3 in the afternoon.
Our initial information was that the last time that Megumi was seen alive was on the Friday afternoon down on the Rundle Mall having some coffee with some friends.
And the last person who she spoke to, she said that she believed that Megumi was going to Grenfell Street to catch the O-Bahn back to the place where she was living.
But it appeared Megumi never made it home on that Friday night.
I did phone her residence and ask if they could see if she was there. They said no, she wasn't in the room, and they said nothing had been touched, the bed hadn't been slept in, and also it had been the census weekend. I don't know if you remember when everybody was counted, and the census form was still there from the Friday night. So I was a bit concerned, and I had emailed the parents as well by then. Her mother had said that she never went anywhere without her teddy bear, and I knew then that there was something very wrong. I telephoned her boyfriend, her ex-boyfriend, to find out if he had heard from her, and he said no, he hadn't, and he had been worried about her as well because it was unusual for him not to hear from her. So I was quite convinced by that time that I needed to contact the police, which I did first thing on Thursday morning.
Megumi Suzuki was last seen by a friend at a city bus stop. Police began distributing missing person posters outside the Maya Centre late this afternoon.
At this stage, we didn't really know whether we had a homicide investigation or simply a missing person.
With posters, publicity and appeals in full swing, a man rang in with crucial evidence. He was a maintenance worker on the bus track that Megumi took home each weekday afternoon. And in the bushes nearby, he found her bag.
There was an identification card with her picture on there. There were numerous books with her name on it, and also a lot of her personal items.
I think the finding of her school books was the first step we had to say, I think that this is going to be a suspicious one. It raised our concern that Megumi may have met with foul play.
SES and mounted police scoured the scrub. The police helicopter was also called in.
There were a number of things actually missing from her possession, and one was her mobile phone. She also had a CD Walkman which she always took with her, and that was also missing.
But what they did find was her credit card and a bus ticket. And those two items took her to one place, a BP service station in the opposite direction of her home.
So that alerted the investigators to the fact, well, why had she been travelling down there? Who might have she seen down there? And how might that information assist us in our investigation?
The BP console operator could pinpoint from his records what time and exactly what she purchased.
She had purchased a SIM card for her telephone. That alerted us to her mobile phone. We were able to then do some checks on the call charge records.
Megumi made 12 calls that night. The last, a text message, sent to her ex-boyfriend, who lived only a stone's throw away from the BP station.
It was fairly obvious now as to what was motivating Megumi to be at that particular location at that time. It was to go and see the boyfriend.
The last known sighting of 18-year-old Megumi Suzuki was at a BP station where she had bought a phone card. The records showed her last call was a text message to her ex-boyfriend.
We knew at that stage that he lived in the very near vicinity of the BP service station.
We actually spoke to him, and he was with friends at another location that night. I think it was the picture show.
He was very, very helpful in our investigation. He was distraught and was making every attempt to assist the police in trying to locate Megumi. It was about a week later that he contacted police with a piece of underclothing, in fact a pair of pants, that he suspected may have belonged to Megumi. So it was important to determine and confirm, were they Megumi's?
In her room at the student residence, detectives found underwear of similar styles.
The distinguishing factor that did stand out was the fact that all her underwear, or the majority of her underwear, were all matching sets.
The bra that matched those pants wasn't located.
But through subsequent forensic testing, we were able to get a DNA match and confirm positively that they were her clothes.
It was a worrying sign, more so as her pants had seemed to appear out of thin air, just like the note on the patrol car.
It was interesting as to how did those pants get there? Were they placed there? Did they blow there by the weather?
But with no real evidence that Megumi had met with foul play, all the police could do was keep asking the public for their help.
Police will begin targeting city nightclubs as part of their search for missing Japanese student Megumi Suzuki.
Police will hand out the posters this weekend to the city's dance and karaoke clubs, where Megumi was a regular.
Although we have grave fears, at this stage I think that there is still a glimmer of hope. We will continue to work on that basis.
Megumi's parents have flown from Tokyo. They've released a statement thanking police and appealing for more information to help find their daughter. We love our daughter very much. We pray that in the coming hours there will be some positive news.
And it appeared their prayers were answered.
The witness and his wife claims they were only metres away from the missing student outside the Bar Hotel at 11:30 this morning. A dozen police patrol cars converged on the area. Streets surrounding the Howard Florey Reserve were blocked off as the dog squad and uniformed patrols thoroughly checked homes and questioned residents.
This particular sighting was from a person who knew Megumi and was associated with her accommodation.
I actually spoke to him myself, and other detectives spoke to him. We were satisfied that he believed the person he saw was Megumi. And as a result of that, we thought, well, hello, yes, she's still alive.
I'm just glad that she's been sighted because she's not dead. That's the main thing. That's good news. good for her parents to know that she's okay and safe and sound. You wouldn't want to be in that position yourself.
The parents of missing teenager Megumi Suzuki have made an emotional plea to their daughter to come forward to police.
Megumi, もしこれを見ていたら早く出てきてほしい。
Megumi, if you saw this, please come forward as soon as possible. Father and mother can't sleep every day.
めぐみ、何も心配しなくていいから。
Don't worry about anything. Please come forward as soon as possible. Father and mother will protect you from now on. Please come forward.
But Megumi never made contact, and there were no more sightings.
At the one moment we thought that she might still be alive, then those hopes were dashed. It was a roller coaster ride to us. We can only try and imagine the roller coaster ride that the parents were on at that particular point in time.
8 weeks after Megumi had gone missing, her photo was put onto a new police website that had just been developed.
And on that same website, we were able to place the unsolved murder of Maya Jakic.
The police are also making a new bid to solve the murder of 30-year-old Maya Jakic, whose body was found over 2 years ago. Detectives have turned to the internet, trying to identify the man who made 2 emergency calls on the night of her murder.
Yeah, I just walked past the old Paynham police station. There seems to be a body of some sort in the bushes there.
People could dial onto the internet and listen to that call from indeed anywhere in Australia or perhaps anywhere in the world. So that wider exposure we thought was both innovative and critical in trying to get that breakthrough that we needed.
The strategy would work. Police were about to find out the long-needed identity of the caller and Maya's killer.
I listened to it about half a dozen times. I closed my eyes and listened to it, and I could see Mark talking to me.
Police knew that the killer of Maya Jakic was most likely the same person who made 2 emergency calls on the night that Maya was murdered. Who he was had eluded them. That was until the internet pulled him into its web.
The following is a taped voice of a male person who contacted police and ambulance 000 facilities.
And one particular person heard his voice.
1999. Police are seeking your assistance to identify the caller.
I logged on and found the tape and listened to it, and listened to it, and listened to it. And I listened to it about half a dozen times. I closed my eyes and listened to it.
Yeah, I just walked past the old Paynham police station. There seems to be a body.
And I was 90% sure that it was my brother. Perhaps Mark was involved with this crime that seemed rather out of character for Mark. He'd never been violent as far as I knew. So I listened to the tape again. And I remember I walked up the passageway a little bit and closed my eyes so there was some distance from the voice.
I don't know, I can vaguely see him. He's got a flashlight flashing around the place.
Inside or?
In around the place.
And I could see Mark talking to me when I could hear that voice. So I sort of decided then that I had to ring Crime Stoppers. And if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. It's there's no damage done. But if I'm right, well, they need to know about it.
Stephen Rust said that he'd been away for a number of years and had just come back. He's seen the publicity, he heard the voice.
Yeah, there's someone hanging around the old Paynham police station.
And I could see the dilemma he was going through, because here he was identifying the voice as being that of his brother, Mark Rust.
Mark Rust was certainly known to us. We had his name in our files for more minor sexual offences.
It was a rather sickening feeling to realise that perhaps Mark had stepped over the line because he'd been in trouble for such a long time with the police and going to jail and parole. The family knew that he was building up and getting worse each time, and that eventually he would do something really terrible and end up in jail for the rest of his life. But at the same time, we'd always hoped that, you know, he wouldn't go that way. So when it was fairly certain that it was Mark who was involved. It was a nasty feeling. It left a very unpleasant taste.
While the police were convinced the 000 caller was Mark Rust, it wasn't enough to make an arrest. They would also need to prove that the note left on the patrol car was his handiwork. And Stephen Rust had provided them with a letter from his brother for comparison.
Our task was to look at the handwriting and see if it had been written by the person. One of the more outstanding features was the double cross on the T, which was a feature of both the specimen letter and the question note. Another feature was the way that the letters were spaced in the word, for example, in the word good. They were very tight and overlapping. And all of the words, particularly where they could be directly compared, words like the and of, and these were very similar in their appearance. In general, every single letter, every single word that could be directly compared showed very close similarities in both their form and in their appearance. I was convinced that the same person had written both the letter that was found on the patrol car and the specimen letter.
So after assessing all of the evidence, we were satisfied that we had a reasonable case, and as a consequence of that, the detectives went out and made the arrest.
A 37-year-old man has been arrested and charged with the murder of Maya Jakic 2 years after she died.
Late yesterday afternoon in Port Augusta, detectives arrested and charged a man.
They had found Mark in jail. His minor sexual offences had progressed to rape, and he was currently on remand in a prison some 300 kilometres away from where Maya was murdered.
Police don't believe there was any relationship between Miss Jakic and the accused. Her parents in Croatia have been contacted by detectives and say they're very pleased about the arrest.
Shortly after Mark Rust was charged and went back to the prison at Port Augusta, he obviously needed someone to confide in because he was probably shocked that he was eventually arrested. This resulted in an informant contacting us who passed on some very valuable information.
Mark had remained silent when he had been questioned and then charged with Maya's murder. It was a different story back at the prison.
The informant said that Mark had told him that he saw a tall, blonde girl walking along Paynham Road. He spoke to her. A struggle ensued, and then he pulled her into the bushes where he had sex with her, and he eventually ended up strangling her.
But it was what the informant told the police next that was totally unexpected.
As a result, we had to move very quickly and make a search of Mark Rust's cell and his belongings.
What they were looking for and found was a CD player. A CD player similar in shape and colour to the one that missing school student Megumi Suzuki had with her on the day she disappeared.
We contacted the mother in Japan, and she was in a situation where she could produce all the relevant document dating back and tracing that sale with the serial number to her and Megumi in Japan.
Of course, finding Rust in possession of some of Megumi's property didn't in itself mean that he'd committed the murder. So whilst it was an important part, there was still a lot more work to be done by the team of investigators.
37-year-old Mark Rust had been arrested and charged with the murder of Maya Jakic. His brother had identified his voice as that of the 000 caller, and a sample of his writing matched exactly that of the note left on the police car. Now Mark was a suspect in the murder of 18-year-old Megumi Suzuki. Her CD Walkman had been found in his cell after an informant contacted the police.
The informant also said in relation to Suzuki that he approached her. He had sex with her, and he said to her, "Don't look at me, whatever you do." She looked at him, saw his face, and as a result he attempted to strangle her. And then he actually killed her by hitting her on the head with a rock. We were also told that Megumi had been murdered on a vacant paddock and that he had burnt clothing or something there. As a result of the information, we went back to the BP service station. Directly opposite was a vacant block of land. We made a search of the vacant block of land and we found the seat of a fire.
The fire brigade was contacted. They confirmed they had put out a small fire on that vacant lot on the very night Megumi had disappeared.
Near the fire we found a rock which could possibly have been used in the offence. We found bits of burnt clothing and arm bracelets, and we knew that these were jewellery worn by Megumi Suzuki.
But Megumi's body had yet to be found. The only clue from the informant was that Mark Rust had dumped her into an industrial bin.
We combed the area based on some directions that were provided, and we did in fact find a bin at the rear of some premises on Goodwood Road.
The circumstantial evidence against Mark Rust was stacking up. But before they could make an arrest, the investigators needed to be absolutely sure that this was the bin where Mark had placed Megumi after he killed her, and they turned to the Rust family for help.
This must have been an enormous dilemma for them to assist the police, in effect, to establish and clarify whether Mark Rust was responsible. Nevertheless, they did provide that assistance, and they were able to confirm that the waste bin had a hippo on the side. The bin that we were looking at had similar markings, and that was the final lead that we needed to satisfy that we had a reasonable case to arrest Rust.
I was shocked about the Maya Jakic thing because it just came out of the blue and really sort of, you know, knocked the wind out of our sails. And then when Jerry told us about Megumi Suzuki, it just fitted together very nicely with what Mark had been doing. So I sort of believed it pretty much straight away.
Megumi's body hasn't been found, but it's understood it may have been dumped in an industrial bin and later at the Wingfield rubbish tip.
We have been praying for our daughter to be alive under any circumstances for the last 3 months. But this week we received the saddest news we could have had.
When they arrived out in Australia, Jerry Feltus took them down to the rubbish dump. And I think that that was obviously a very, very traumatic moment for the parents to sit on the side of a rubbish tip, knowing that somewhere amongst literally hundreds of tonnes of rubbish, there was the body of your daughter. So we certainly felt obligated to try and do everything possible to recover Megumi's body, and that was the next challenge for us.
But first, the grisly search for the murdered Japanese student, 18-year-old Megumi Suzuki, has begun at a Wingfield landfill site.
Megumi was dumped at the site nearly 4 months before, so numerous layers of baled rubbish were discarded until the level they believed she would be in was located. Then those bales were broken apart and searched.
We had to go through every bale. We were looking for things that related back to a particular date. We had to go through newspapers, invoices, everything with dates on it to ensure that we were in the correct area and we weren't moving out of it. You were going through trying to find things which kept you on track.
And after 11 days, and after removing tens of thousands of tonnes of rubbish, they were in the exact spot, and Megumi's body was found.
There was a mixture of relief and sorrow to think that someone could meet such an untimely death in the way that Megumi was murdered, and then to have a body dumped in the location that it was dumped was absolutely horrific.
The amazing thing about finding the body of Megumi Suzuki is that she still had her boots on, she still had clothing on, and the bra that she was wearing was an identical match to the pants which her ex-boyfriend had found in the laneway months earlier near the vacant block of land.
We believe that our daughter was found, thanks to the efforts of everyone involved in her search. We realise it was a very difficult task considering the circumstances. It is no exaggeration to say it was a miracle to find her so quickly.
But Rust's confession to murdering Magumi didn't come quickly. He maintained his innocence, as he did for the murder of Maja Djakic. Then, exactly 1 year after Magumi's body was found, he changed his plea.
There's been a shock development in the murder of Japanese student Megumi Suzuki. A 37-year-old man from the northeastern suburbs has pleaded guilty.
I know that you've done this. You know you've done it, and you need to put your hand up for it so that there's not a big court case. These poor families aren't dragged through this muck, and we can all get over it as best we can and bring some closure to everyone's life.
6 months later, Mark Rust also admitted to the murder of Maja Djakic on the 12th of April 1999.
The families of 2 young women brutally murdered by a homicidal predator have given harrowing accounts of the loss of their loved ones.
On behalf of the families, friends gave heartbreaking accounts of how the murders have totally devastated dozens of lives. Fusei Simpson described the Suzuki family's anguish, quoting Megumi's mother, "It makes me insane when I think of her being treated like rubbish." Ida Gregov related the thoughts of Maya's mother, Yagada. Why would anyone want to kill Maya like an innocent bird and cover her with branches and cover his dirty crime?
I've done it with all my heart. And I did call Maya's mum and I said, this is what I've done. I actually spoke on your behalf. And I saw the killer. And it's done, I said, it's finished.
Mark Rust was sentenced to life in jail without parole for both murders. The judge ruled that the 39-year-old was incapable of controlling his sexual urges and would be detained until further order.
You ask yourself, why has he done that? How could he have done that? Because we all grew up together in the same house. It's emotionally quite devastating to realise that someone so close to you in your immediate family can commit such a crime. It's really... It's devastating. It's I don't know, I can't really find the words to describe just how bad it makes you feel. It's a dreadful feeling.
The Suzuki family are still very distressed. They are really feeling it at the moment because they had great expectations for their daughter.
Maya's mother took her daughter's body back to Croatia, where she visits the grave every day.
We both lost a very, very special person. A lovely daughter and the most beautiful friend I ever had. For once, she can rest in peace.